done a good job.
That is a
Man,
very.
this is
Oh, well, thank you, Miss Brashaw.
done a good job all the way through. Neighbors.
If there's anything like my driveway, it's 30 inches of snow. That's worse, you get a car parked out before his house. On the proper side of the street.
We had so
It's good to see you, Timmy.
our deck is off the ground.
Who is it I heard?
I've got
It's hard because of the rain. So I was trying to do it at home.
Stop signs or cars?
I'm glad my dad last year he bought a two-stage snow thrower to go on the front of his tractor, so I just went over to his house and borrowed his tractor because I tried shoveling for about 20 minutes and I think I got about 10 feet.
Ouch.
Until we have one guy. The neighbors are
Trying to stay out of trouble. Notice I said trying.
Did we find the stop sign for Alamo in Greenfield? Okay. I got a call that the stop sign was down there. Like, I don't know if it's in the snow or not, but it's not here.
Life is good. How are you?
So far,
Where's the stop sign down last week? I mean, just bigger than hell.
been around.
Monday. I got to get my computer working again.
I haven't had a free shot.
I'll tell you, I said to somebody, I said, you think it's so much fun?
Got my mini mixed up.
Go ride with the driver.
Oh man,
First thing
great.
you find out is your number one. As you go by everybody's driveway and you start looking. I mean, there's more to it.
Got a new
These guys, even in this, I mean, that's why I say, I hit the light too cheap. Yes, it did. Just be safe this weekend. There's the main thing with everything.
Okay, being it's 6 o'clock, we'll call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Mayor Miller,
Here.
Alderpersons Brashaw,
Here.
Keister, Chesney, Clem,
Here.
McClanathan, Ross, Smith, and Busker.
And then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Alderman Brashaw.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And Alderperson Brashaw, it's your meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Miller. First thing on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman McClanathan and a second by Alderman Clem. All those in favor?
Aye.
Approved by all? Any opposed? And it passes. On to number 5, public comments. Do we have any public comments at this time? Bernie? We have one name on here, Bernie Margula. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Name and address.
My name is Bernie Margala. I reside at 1310 South Galena. And I'm actually very happy to see you attack the ordinance here on water and sewer. I don't think it actually goes far enough, and I think there's some improvements that should be looked at. I had left town here for about 3 weeks. The chief knows about it. And I came back and I've shoveled snow for the last week. It would have been a shame if I'd have came back and had my water shut off just because I was out of town. So on the water shutoffs, I think we ought to think about accommodating people in some manner, one way or the other, if they're out of town and have been paying their bills on a consistent basis. Also, another thing that's kind of interesting is Social Security payments are on the third Wednesdays, fourth Wednesdays, second Wednesdays, and the first Wednesdays of every month. A lot of people are on Social Security. If your billing cycle could work against that, we ought to be somewhat concerned about that. The Water Capital Improvement Fund should go totally away. It should be debt service. Capital improvement should be a policy and a function of depreciation that's put away based upon all of the expenses being paid for by the rates that you've established. To make a long story short, I've been able to restructure IEPA loans for a community from 20 years to 30 years at 1%, and an old loan that was in existence for 10 years extended another 10 years at also 1%. This has actually saved that particular community, which has a very small population, over $10 per month per resident. So we need to really think about how we structure our rates so that the taxpayer and the ratepayers actually get a benefit. And one other thing too is I think you're taking, when I was here, I had identified the $2 million that the city hasn't been paid from past due water bills. A lot of this probably are landlords, and I hope this ordinance goes after the owner of the property for payments that have been not made by tenants. When we took this to a very large extent and made that happen, we have in this particular community like $2,000 a month of carryover from the previous month's billing. I wonder what your number is in regards to what your accounts receivable carries over from one month to the next. We need to be aggressive in that perspective.
Mr. Mergula, your time is up.
Time is up. Okay, thank
We
you.
thank you
But-
very much for your comments, sir.
Okay, so there are things that we can do. By the way, I restructured my bill for this other community. I would have paid $98. I paid $81 here in town.
Thank you
So-
very much. Council, before us we have the approval of the minutes from the Committee of the Whole special meeting held on January 22nd, 2018. Hopefully you've had time to go over these. Do we have a motion for approval?
So moved. Second it.
We have a motion by Alderman Keister and a second by Alderman Ross. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Now on to some serious business here. Discussion of ordinances, which is number 7, rewriting the liquor codes, gaming codes, and other affected chapters of the codified ordinances. Before you, in your packets, you had the liquor codes and other affected codes. This will be presented by City Legal Counsel Steve Cox and City Manager Lowell Crow.
Before we get started, Chairperson Brashaw, we have some members of the Liquor Commission present, and I believe Mr. Mahoney has some comments that he would like to provide on a general basis regarding the Liquor Commission's process in all of this. I'm happy to step up and give you all the boring details and discussion after Mr. Mahoney's done, but I think it would be instructive for the council to hear what Mr. Mahoney has to say.
That sounds good. Counselor?
Evening, everybody. First of all, do I have only 3 minutes?
No, sir. It's not public comment. This is city
Wonderful.
business.
Secondly, I think we ought to have that guy come up here and talk to us about the liquor code. Seems to me like he was pretty thorough and on top of what was going on. So around 10 months ago, as a brand new liquor commission, we were given a directive from the mayor to take a look at the liquor code, simplify it, figure out how to have it make sense. What we had was a series of rules that had developed where somebody would come in with a new idea, a new business, a new something, and the city council would pass essentially kind of a patchwork piece of legislation that would work for that particular business, but then it didn't work for anything else, a loophole, so to speak. And so the liquor code had this series of loopholes that worked for one particular business, but many things conflicted. It would conflict with zoning. It would conflict with all kinds of other areas. So when we started out, we said, well, number one, we want to figure out what we have and how can we streamline this, clean it up, how can we have it make sense, how can we have it be something that is simpler, easier, and something that works for everybody, not just a series of pieces that work for one piece and not everybody else. The other thing that we wanted is we wanted to have a meeting that was an open discussion. So right from the get-go, from our first meeting, which in our first meeting we had quite a few people attend of our regular meetings, it was an open conversation. Anybody that wanted to talk, they could talk, and we would openly converse with any licensee or anybody else who had a suggestion. We wanted to become a situation where we could say yes instead of saying no and figure out how to make things work while still protecting interests that everybody wants protected, while still making sure that we keep everybody's concerns in order. So the next thing that we decided to do at the direction of Ms. Mayor is we thought, well, let's have an open conversation with the licensees directly and see what do they want? How can we help them? What are their concerns? What are the things that we want to do and how they respond to it? So we hand-delivered invitations to everybody that we could, all of the members of the Liquor Commission, including the mayor, hand-delivered invitations to every licensee, and we held 4 two-hour open meetings in which we discussed with everybody what their concerns were and what they wanted. What you will be presented with reflects every concern that was presented to us. So anybody that said, I'm worried about X, Y, and Z, that has been taken care of in this particular liquor code. Nobody was told no. Nobody was told we're not going to do that. I will tell you that when I started this process, and none of us spoke to each other before we walked in, we all came in cold and we all came in with our own ideas. A lot of the things that are going to get presented to you at the beginning, I may not have been a big supporter of. But the more that I talked to the various licensees, the more that I talked to the local businesses, the more that I understood my concerns weren't their concerns. And in fact, their concerns were very little. What they really wanted to do was to be able to run their businesses the way that they wanted to run their businesses. That was their biggest concern. Let me do what I want to do. And how can we set up something so that I can do the things that I want to do and I don't have to jump through 80 million hoops and I don't have to go to 15 different meetings and I'm able to run the business that I want to run. They weren't that concerned with competition. They weren't that concerned with, I think one of the things that's probably going to get discussed amongst you guys is the removal of any caps, the removal of caps of the number of liquor licenses. I really thought that a lot of businesses would be significantly concerned about that. We didn't hear that in our meetings at all. So as we went through these meetings, we developed a series of ideas and we quickly realized that our liquor code was just simply too much of a mess. So we started over. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We went to something that already worked in other places, and then we streamlined everything down, and every time we had one of these meetings, we would present, here's where we are, and the various licensees would come in and say, here's the concern I have, here's the concern I have, here's the concern I have, and then we would place all of those things. We make sure that everything was met that everybody wanted. What you have before you is something that was unanimously voted on in terms of positive, including the mayor. I would say it was emphatically unanimously voted on. And I think the experience of last year shows that a lot of the new things that we've tried in this community have been incredibly successful. The pub crawl last March 17th was very successful. Wine tasting, very successful. The beer fest, incredibly successful. We coupled that with the parklet, very successful. We coupled that with we spray painted the things so that the kids could do the paintings. Not a single problem was had at any of these events. Through every step of this, we consulted with the police, we consulted with the mayor, obviously, we consulted with everybody. All of these things have worked, all of these things have been positive, all of these things have been helping move the community forward. I would encourage you to take a serious look and read exactly what we're presenting you, because I think there's could be a knee-jerk reaction of this is what you're trying to do. Take a close look at how we did these things. We didn't just slap something on a piece of paper. This has been done with a great deal of effort and conscious thought. You've got a former chief of police on this committee. You've got a former high-ranking police officer on this committee. You've got somebody who's an executive in a successful business in this committee, and you have a registered Democrat who, as of this July, will not have drank for 7 years on this committee. And we are here saying, we think this is all a great idea. And we have taken in everybody's concerns, and we've put them down and taken care of them while still opening things up so that these businesses can allowed to be flourishing businesses and try new ideas. I'll be happy to take questions on our procedure. Mr. Cox is going to be very good at answering the questions on the intimate details of the code itself.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. Council, questions?
Madam Chair,
Alderman Keister.
just out of curiosity, the license for gaming machines, is that covered in here? I haven't been able to find it anywhere. And if so, is that gone unlimited, or is that as we voted on it a few years back?
That's all, it is in there, and as I said, Mr. Cox is going to be better at talking to you about the details, but essentially what we've done is we've combined those things. So it goes unlimited along with the liquor license, but you have to be a full liquor license holder in order to get a gaming license, and you've got to qualify under the requirements of that, what used to be an A liquor license. And we also upped the requirements there. So it used to be that you had to have 35% of your sales come from non-gaming, now it's 50. So in other words, yeah, you can go ahead and get a liquor license and get a gaming license, but it's a lot harder to get. So a parlor isn't going to make it under this new rule. You're not going to be able to have a parlor. There won't be any additional ones. Also, one of the things that we're going to talk to you about is setting up a system for verifying those sales of the 50%. One of the ideas that was suggested to us that we liked was making it so that every licensee will have to submit something from a CPA verifying that, in fact, half of their sales came from non-gaming. Otherwise, they'll be in violation of that liquor license.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman Keister.
Thank you. I believe Alderman Clem and I were the only two on here when this was voted on, if I remember correctly, to limit the license. And help me out here, if you would, Alderman Clem, but I believe the concern at that time was a glut of too many establishments with the gaming. I don't know if I'm 100% convinced that the 50% sale will prevent that, but I guess that's a concern I have because this council voted on restricting it to what it was at that time. I don't know if I'm really comfortable right now expanding on that.
So I agreed with you. Okay, when we started this, I hate the machines. I don't like them. I don't like them in my community, but they are here. Here's what I learned talking to the business owners in the area. First of all, it doesn't matter how many places you have the same number of gamers in a given community. Loves Park learned that. So you could have 4 places or you could have 400 places, and you have the same number of gamers. It doesn't make any difference. Loves Park opened it up, and the amount of money being run through those machines didn't change. So when you open this up, what you're opening it up to is competition. And quite frankly, if you add to these liquor licenses, you're going to create competition for the parlors. And the people that are adding are paying the $10,000, paying the $1,500 every year, and they're also proving that they have 50% sales in other areas, which the parlors are not doing. So they're paying sales tax. They're doing a lot of other things that are actually benefiting your community. While all of the studies I agreed with you, council member, when we started this. Okay, I was on the same page. All the studies show that that's not true. The studies show you've got the same number of gamers no matter how many parlors or how many different businesses that you have that are running these machines.
Okay, thank you.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman Chesney.
Thanks. Tim, was there any thought given to the parlors on, I think that there's general consensus that there's not a great appetite for additional parlors, but was there ever any discussion, the way that this was written, to increase the fees of the parlors for those that fall up below the 50% threshold, having a different formula for them?
Well, first of all, we kind of decided that we couldn't retroactively change their deal. So we grandfathered them in. And again, Mr. Cox is better to comment on this. There's not going to be an additional parlor under this liquor code. It's not going to exist. Also, I think we did up their fee, their annual fee for the machine. It wasn't significant, but I think that we did. Since they were already up in business and since they were existing businesses, we took the position that we couldn't change what they already had going on. And really, we wanted to get away from that. We wanted to get away from specific rules to apply to specific things. We wanted to have a broad code that was as simple as you can make it, as easy as you can make it, so it's going to last for a long period of time and apply to everybody. Did I answer your question?
You did.
Okay.
Chair.
Yes, Alderman Ross.
Yes, Mr. Mahoney. When you said the liquor establishment or liquor businesses in town, they said they wanted to be able to do what they wanted to do. Could you point out some of the things they want to do?
They want to have beer gardens. They want to have things like parklets, like what Mort's did, which I think has been very successful. They'd like to be able to have outside activities, like on the wine tasting. They wanted to be able to not only pour the wine, but to sell it. So we came up with a way to do that and actually protect our local businesses. And with me on the panel, one of the things that I, of course, was concerned of was liability, right? That's something that I'm going to be worried about. So we actually upped the limits of liability that everybody had to have. We made that $1 million, $2 million, as opposed to what was already there. We did a lot of things to protect the licensees because they would express that they wanted protection in certain areas. And every time that they did, we did. So when they said, look, we don't have a problem with these people coming in and selling wine at the wine tasting, but we'd like them to get it through us, we said, sure. So we're going to make it, you're going to have to go through a local licensee. The wine tasting people were happy to do that. They said, great, at least we get a chance to sell it. And now you can sell in a non-establishment on a single day basis based upon a specific variance. The Freeport Downtown Development wanted to be able to have more events. They're not a full liquor license holder. So the local licensees expressed a concern saying, well, wait a minute, if they go from 3 events to 10, that might take away from my ability to have events. So we put a cap on that. We said, all right, they can have as many events, or I think we went up to 10 events if they want, but once they get past 5, now they got to merge with a local licensee. They've got to partner up with somebody who has a local liquor license. Like I said, a great deal of thought of effort went into this, and whenever anybody expressed a concern, we protected it. Nobody was said no.
Thank you.
Attorney Mahoney, may I ask a question?
Sure.
When you mentioned that they partner up with a local liquor license holder, are you saying that then that local license holder would then make a profit off of the sales of that liquor?
Assuming they run their business correctly.
Thank you.
Chair?
Yes.
Go ahead, Tom.
No, well,
Alderman Clem?
Tim, you and I had talked about this privately, and Steve and I talked about this, and I, like Mike, was on the board when we put the number to stop to the numbers. I really think, you know, there's no doubt you guys have done your homework and everything else, and the concern is, just like Andrew and I have talked, is the parlor setup. The main concern in the parlor setup was the fact of none of the money stays in town. Zero. Goes right straight out the door. You know, very little money spent on the, in fact, one of the establishments here in town that has a parlor has a limit on the number of alcoholic beverages that you can have, which also limits the amount you're going to sell. So I really believe that you guys have done a lot on this, and I appreciate that. Steve and I talked a little bit, and Steve, one of my concerns is, as you know, as we were talking, and Tim has brought it up twice, is a concern that, do I really think that all the existing license holders realize what the 50% is going to be?
They bet.
You know, I mean, you know, excuse me, didn't mean to interrupt you, but, you know, just like they said, same thing you said, well, I'd take a look at that, but, you know.
Well,
Go ahead.
Attorney Mahoney?
So back to the parlors, just so I'm clear, just so there's you know, no gray area here. There won't be another parlor under this one. You know, make no mistake, folks, all the money that goes into those machines, you know, leaves town. I mean, well, not all of it, but a decent percentage of it. And the idea of adding new liquor licenses, those new businesses may well take businesses away from those parlors if they run their business differently. And in fact, one of the businesses probably, if you guys decide to pass this, will be, my guess, will be one of the first ones to apply, specifically told us that if we're allowed to open up, we in fact will take business away from those parlors. We guarantee it. Along the lines of what Mr. Clem just brought up, Councilman Clem just brought up, in that, do all of these people know what's coming? Well, they've had ample warning. I mean, we've mailed it, we've talked to them, we've emailed, we've put it in skywriting. I mean, I don't know what else we could do. And they've had all kinds of time, and I am the most on the grid guy that you're ever going to meet. Even Andrew Chesney isn't as on the grid as much as I am. and you can find my phone number everywhere, and I answer it 24/7. It's never not on me. So anybody that's called me, I've talked to them. And so if they don't know it's coming, they should. Here's another thing to think about. Not all of your businesses here in town do things appropriately. Some of them, in fact, do things that they, and one of the things that's going to happen with us, I can tell you over the next year is the folks that are paying their stuff late, the folks that aren't giving us their that's all going to end under I would be my guess, is those things are all going to get straightened out. When you open this up, you're going to open it up to more competition. I mean, I would love it if you guys passed a law tonight that said if you have a case pending in Stevenson County, your attorney has to have their primary residence inside the city of Freeport. I think that'd be great. But I doubt that you're going to do that. And, one of the things about the caps is it actually reduces competition. And Mr. Chesney's got to be over there just getting excited hearing me talking about free market economics. But not all of these businesses are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Some of these businesses are going to CVS and buying cases of beer and liquor on a Sunday morning and then going back to their establishments and selling it when they're not supposed to. And you all nod your heads because we know who does it. Well, if you open up these liquor licenses and you get more well-run businesses in the town, those businesses are going to have a more difficult time. I mean, in a way, we're protecting the people that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And we're not rewarding the people who are. And quite frankly, the people who are doing what they're doing were in that conference room every meeting that we had, and they were sitting there going, doesn't scare me if you guys get rid of the caps, let the market decide. Because they run their business as well, and so they were going, we don't have a problem with that, open it up. But let me do what I want to do with my business within reasonable rules, within restrictions. We got to make sure all the, understand, I'm assuming you understand all the basic stuff's going to happen. They still got to follow state law. They still got to have, we still got to make sure that kids aren't, it's not going to be a free-for-all. But as we've shown in the last year, it's not a free-for-all. These events haven't had problems. These events haven't had arrests. The pub crawl last March 17th didn't have a single DUI, to my associates' dismay. So these things have all done very, very well within the regulations, allowing more business. When I was at Beer Fest, I ran into a group of college buddies from the Quad Cities. I went to school in Davenport, Iowa, and I asked them, what are you doing here? They said, we came up for the Beer Fest. Well, the Quad Cities had a beer fest going on the exact same weekend. I said, why didn't you go to that one? And they said, this one's got better beer. So you were drawing people from over 100 miles away. Well, that's pretty good, and that's a pretty successful event.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman Keister.
It's not a question, but more of a statement. I want to thank the commission for what they did. The meetings that we've had to move Freeport forward, one of the things we have identified is making it more business-friendly and easier for business. And I want to applaud you guys on what you did here, making it that way. And I think it's going to help move things forward in this town.
Thank you.
Chair?
Alderman Chesney.
Thanks. Tim, what fees were adjusted? Do we have a ledger as to?
Cox would be better to answer that for you. I think we upped the fees in terms of the number of machines, or I'm sorry, the cost per machine. We didn't up the fee for the license. We didn't up the fee for the renewal. Was that it?
We have an idea what that looks like?
Yeah, it's actually contained in the ordinance. If you want me to address any of the technical stuff, I can take over at this point.
Whenever they're done with me, that's fine. Council is, council has lived with this for months, so.
Mr. Mahoney, would you mind standing there just for a few moments in case they have
I can stand here all
questions
night.
for either one of you? And Mr. Cox, I do remember seeing that in our papers, but I don't remember the exact dollar amounts. Do you recall what those amounts were for the?
Well, I have the proposed. I just don't have the before.
You're talking about with what the previous gaming, it was $10.
So video gaming now is $250. What was it before?
I think it was it was $250 base, but then $10 per machine.
So you okay?
Did that answer your question, Alderman Chesney?
Did.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair,
Alderman McClanathan.
Attorney Cox, were you looking to give kind of like a substantive overview, not just for us, but also for the public?
I was.
I'll wait for that.
Council, any more questions for Mr. Mahoney before he takes a seat?
Madam Chair.
Alderman Smith.
Not a question, but basically an observation. I just want to thank him and the rest of the commissioners for the effort in really taking ownership of this issue and bringing forth what looks to be a really substantive change and substantive document.
Thank you, Councilman Smith. And, you know, the four people that you have in the commission took this all very seriously. I mean, they really did. I mean, we all were pretty serious, to use the word again twice, about what we were doing. And, you know, the direction of the mayor really showed us where we wanted to go, and her leadership has taken us there. So, as I said, when you look at this, understand that you've got four people who've been in this community, I think all of us pretty much our whole life, certainly I have, and have been involved in this community for many, many, many years. And as I said, none of us, we all know each other, but we don't know each other very well. None of us spoke to each other before we came walking in, and everybody was on the same page in terms of where this went, emphatically on the same page in terms of where this went. I think that kind of shows you where the town wants to go. So I would encourage you to really take that seriously as you're looking at this. I mean, this isn't just a unanimous vote. It's an emphatic unanimous vote of this is where everybody wants to head, and these things are working. So thank you.
Alderman Chesney.
Tim, what was the rationale of increasing the fee?
I don't know. I didn't do that.
Well, who raised the fee?
Because we want more money.
It's okay, we're still way under other municipalities.
Who raised it? Well, I think
Oh yeah,
who
one of
raised
the,
the fee
so
now?
understand one of the things that we did, Alderman Chesney, is like I said, we didn't reinvent the wheel. So when we looked at ours and we went, that's got to go. One of the first things we said is, well, let's look at other communities that are successful, and let's figure out their liquor codes and you know, look and put it together in something that makes sense. So as we did that, because you heard me talk about Loves Park, you heard me, you know, we looked at a lot of these other communities that have done things. Loves Park was a big one. They completely opened it up to everybody. If you wanted gaming, you got it. And so on one street there was 80 million parlors, and they found out some interesting stuff. The amount of revenue going through those parlors didn't change at all. So you can go from 20 to 100, and you've got the same amount of money. It's just where the people went. So which business treated them the best according to them that they wanted to go to. But one of the other things we found out is how much other areas were charging for the same thing. So I think part of that was, well, we're not charging enough.
Did that answer your question? Thank you. I have a question. Regarding these gaming machines, does the state of Illinois stipulate how much each machine has to pull in or take in order to keep the machines in the establishment? And if not, are they allowed to pull them from the establishments?
I think they do.
They do.
Both of those. I think they do have to have a certain amount, and that's not right?
It's kind of interesting. The Gaming Commission is completely separate from the Liquor Commissioner. They're actually tighter, but they don't, as long as the money, they're getting some revenue from it, they don't care whether the machine stays there or not, as long as they meet the requirements for what the machine cost to be in there. So if, say, the machine is breaking even by more than $1, they'll keep it there, because the municipality gets I think it's 1 to 1.5%, and the state gets like 3.5% off of it.
I'll tell you right now, first time I went to Vegas, I was in 6th grade. Every other kid in my class went to the Boy Scout camp. I went to Vegas because my dad done, true story. And I can tell you right now that whatever the deal is that you get, it's horrible. It's unbelievably horrible. The mob gave you such a better deal when they used to run this stuff as opposed to when the state of Illinois runs this stuff. Your odds are way worse. But I know that like in Vegas, the rake is like they do like 98% payouts, and what are these machines, like 65% or something?
They're 60 to 65%. What's even scarier is there are more machines in the state of Illinois than there are than all of the state of Nevada.
So the answer to the question, if I may reiterate for the listening public, is that as long as the state is happy with the take on it and they make $1 off of it above and beyond their fees, then they're going to let the gaming establishments keep those machines.
I guess that's right. I guess I don't really.
Correct?
I can help you with that.
Okay, Alderman Clem first.
Okay, yeah. The way I've heard it is, I know there's, and I was involved with a business that also was involved in gaming, was on the board of it. The way it really works, a person that, number one, the state turns it on and off the computer every morning, the computer every night, so you're only going to game X amount of time. They have complete control over everything. The next person is the supplier of the machines. The supplier of the machines has a great big say-so in the thing, because if they're not making money, they aren't going to leave their machines there. Is basically the way it lays out. The place I was in, they removed 2 for a period of time until it picked back up, and then they put the 2 back in. So the middle person in there has a lot to do with it, especially when it comes to advertising, programs allowed, spiffs that they have, and all that kind of different stuff. So they can control if somebody's gonna have it or not also. But there has been a business that, when they first came in, took gaming machines here in Freeport, put them in and took them out not that much later.
Thank you for your answers, Alderman Clem, excuse me.
You know, just because you have the machines doesn't mean your business is successful.
That's right.
I mean, there's businesses in town that have machines that aren't doing that great, and then you go down to Mort's and the place is packed, and they don't have a single machine, and they're not gonna. You know, Casey's doesn't have machines. I don't know if they're nationwide, but the entire chain doesn't have machines, and they won't. That's part of the directive from the family that owns that company. So it doesn't ensure anything. And as I said, the more what we found is the more competition, the more that shows what businesses take good care of their patrons and what businesses don't, because the people that are gonna play no matter where the machines are.
Chair.
Alderman Keister first, and then Alderman Chesney.
Okay, and I want to thank Alderman Clem. You pretty much said what I was going to say. I do know that there have been several establishments in Stevenson County and other areas that I know of that have the machines pulled, and it was the company that runs the machines, not the state that does it. If they're not making money, they're not going to leave the things there. They're going to put them somewhere else.
Thank you. Alderman Chesney.
So Tim, talk to me a little bit about drive-throughs. I understand that we're going to allow somebody want to do a drive-through, that would be allowed, but then we also had a conversation offline that said that, you know, we have more teeth in this, that if anything doesn't look right, we have mechanisms in place to change those behaviors very quickly. So could you bring some ease to maybe the council, because I don't know that historically many council members were real excited about additional drive-throughs in Freeport, but this would expand that, but maybe talk about some of the safeguards you have in place on that.
Well, it's perfect that you would bring this up, Mr. Chesney, because as we're just trying to make Freeport great again, one of the things we're doing is we're just opening it up to free market capitalism. We took out a lot of stuff, and the idea being, instead of having this hodgepodge that we had, that quite frankly, guys, I mean, you should have seen what we had to go through in order to create the parklet for Mort's. I mean, it was 29 different licenses and modify 15 different, oh my God, it was unbelievable. I mean, the only reason that happened is just because, I mean, it was like sending a man to the moon, just because everybody decided it was going to happen, so that we did. Well, that's not very friendly to business. And if you want your businesses to grow, and if you want the community to grow, and if you want things to be encouraged, we got to simplify stuff. So this is a basic code that we're going to start with. You can always add if you want to add something, but under this provision, yeah, we don't. It doesn't have a restriction on drive-throughs. It doesn't have some restrictions on other things too. So if somebody wants to open up a drive-through, they can open up a drive-through. Now they still got to follow. If they want to do delivery, they want to do package delivery, they can do package delivery. Now, we upped the amount of liability that they have to have. We doubled it. They've still got to follow all the state laws. They've still got to follow all the regulations in terms of how to do that. And like I said, if you guys want to add it, add it. But the idea being, give it a try. You've opened up some things and it's all worked. Let them do it. And if it starts to not work, well, then you guys can, we can come in and change stuff. I mean, we always have the power to come back in and say, based upon, the way that you're doing these things, we want to take another look at it as a liquor commission. But for right now, this new code doesn't restrict any of that stuff.
Yes, Alderman Ross.
Okay, Mr. Mahoney, correct me if I'm wrong. I know you won't have no problem with that. Getting back to the drive-through, there's only one drive-through in town right now, in the city.
No, there's two.
There's
Clarification.
Sunshines,
And
and there's
Pretzel City.
Pretzel City.
Okay. Here it is. My understanding was that if you eliminate your drive-through, you can no longer have it. Correct?
That was the rule, like, and that's the current rule, because you guys haven't changed that.
The new rule, is there a new rule coming, or I mean, no?
There's this new liquor code doesn't speak to drive-throughs.
Doesn't,
Now remember, guys, we spoke to the police when we did all this stuff and asked them their concerns too. Our council did. I didn't, but our council did.
Right.
I don't want Barclow to get mad at me.
No, I'm still trying to get over the registered Democrat.
I don't want to make.
No, I'm just kidding.
I don't want to make mad the one guy with a gun.
Okay,
You can't shoot.
let's stay on topic here.
I don't want him to try.
Go ahead.
So it doesn't speak to any of those things. But like I said, the police didn't have a concern with that. The city, the various folks that we talk, has there been a great problem created by those drive-throughs that have been there for how long has Sunshine's had a drive-through? 30 years?
Long time.
Has it? How long?
Long time.
Longer. Has it created some massive problem? Is there a great what created by that?
No.
No. One of the things that's coming is delivery. I mean, Amazon is clearly starting that, and so there's a lot of businesses out there that want to do package delivery. Now, they still got rules that they got to follow when they do that, but do we want to restrict it? Do we want to restrict those businesses? If some business sets that up and does that very well, first of all, it's going to cut down on DUIs, folks. It's going to cut down on people driving while intoxicated. I mean, it will. I'm the guy that doesn't drink, and I'm up here saying,
So Alderman Ross, that isn't included at this time in the rewriting. Is there anything that you wanted to consider into this?
No. No. It was just that some of the understanding, I just wanted to clarify it myself about the drive-throughs. Now, like I say, though, yes, we have two in town, and it was my understanding if you done away with your drive-through, you could no longer have it.
Right.
and I think that's the current rule, and if you sold your business, it doesn't continue either, which
Correct.
has a huge impact on the value of the business. Mr. Franz's place over there, when he died, that value of that business, because that drive-through couldn't, with the issue of the drive-through, shrunk the value of that business considerably and was a very negative impact on his widow. So, all these again, you want to, it's not like, we want to keep things safe. We didn't, we don't, like I said, we don't want a free-for-all. I mean, we don't want Biff Town and Back to the Future 2, okay? But at the same time, we want to allow businesses to grow. We want to allow businesses to try new ideas. We want to allow the community to try to do something different. And as I said, we watched very closely these things that happened over this last 10 months. And we asked everybody, what problems did you have from Beer Fest? What problems did you have from the pub crawl? What problems did you have from the wine tasting?
Thank you. Attorney Cox, if it is the council's pleasure to send this to the next regularly scheduled council meeting, and someone wants to make a change, is there still time to do that within the next 2 hearings on it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Okay, I just want to make sure the council was aware of that too. I really like a lot of what you've said, and a lot of it makes sense. I haven't had any specific concerns myself, but I just want to make sure the council gets all their concerns addressed with this. Council, Alderman Keister?
One concern I have with the drive-through is I'm willing to give it a try, because I think at the most I ever remember having at Freeport is maybe 3 drive-throughs for liquor. But what I'm concerned about is if we go ahead and put this in there and let them have it, say we get 4 or 5 establishments that got it, and all of a sudden this becomes an issue, how do we stop it? I mean, is it something that we can just say, okay, we changed the ordinance, you can't do it anymore? Or once they've got it, we've got to keep them going and grandfathered in until such times they change hands or anything? I mean, how does that work?
Well, your attorney's probably the better one to answer that question, but you guys can always change a rule, or you guys can always create a new restriction, or first of all, I don't think we're going to be inundated with drive-throughs. I just don't really think that that's going to happen. And if you've had 2 in town and you had 3 in town for 20, 30, whatever the amount of time span was, I don't see how it's going to. But I'm not the guys who are voting for it. We already did. We already voted. But certainly, if all of a sudden, again, the idea being, if something pops up and it's a problem, then we'll address it, and we'll address it quickly. And I can't speak for the other members of the commission. I'm speaking simply by watching them and how we all have operated. But one of the other things that I think is going to happen with this commission is we're giving people a lot of rope. Don't hang yourself. Follow the rules. Right. If you don't follow the rules, again, I'm only one vote, but just from watching the demeanor of everybody, the demeanor very much is, we want to open this up for you guys. We want everybody to try things, but you better follow the rules and don't come before us with problems. Because I think that's not going to go well. But if it creates a significant problem, the police are going to communicate with us quickly. We'll address it. We don't want problems in the town. We want growth. We want opportunity. We want new events. We want things to happen. We want something different than what we've been doing for the last 20 years that hasn't worked very well.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman Keister.
And I agree with you 100%. Change is not bad. I guess my concern was if it did become an issue like the last time, once we did away with it, if you had it, you kept it until the business was changed. So if it does become an issue, is there an out we can use to shut them down? That's what I'm concerned about.
You guys got home rule status. You can always do anything you want.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. And Mr. Cox, are you ready to weigh in on any of this now?
I am.
Thank you. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
And while Attorney Cox is approaching the microphone, I also want to thank Attorney Mahoney. Tim Mahoney is a good person in the community. At least he thinks so. No, I apologize. I think so too, sir. And the entire Liquor Commission. I was just making a joke because Tim is my friend and he also is a comedian in the community, so that was supposed to be funny. Attorney Cox, we don't expect quite so much humor from you, but if you would like to weigh in, that's okay.
Well, that's good. That's good. So, and I too would like to thank the Liquor Commission. They've spent a great deal of time on this. It's really been a great process to work through. I will try to go through and hit the high points, but please feel free to interrupt. Please feel free to ask questions. My intent is to explain this to the best of my ability without going through it verbatim. So some general concepts. And you heard a lot of this already from Tim, but the idea is to tear this thing down to a base level, make it as clean as possible, make the rules as clear as possible so that they're easier to follow and easier to enforce. So what you see, what you're going to see when we go through this is you're going to see some very basic licenses. You're really one of 3 things, right? You're a tavern, you're a restaurant, or you're package sales. And there's all sorts of different permutations of that, but you're 3 things at core. So we start off with that and then define additional add-ons that can be selected without creating this wide array of licenses as some communities have done. We've got a tiered fee structure based on the intensity of the use. That makes good sense. As Tim pointed out, there's no specific numeric limit on the video gaming licenses. We'll get into that a little bit more as well. I've got a little bit of feedback to some of the questions. There's an expansion of rights. Remember, and when I say expansion, that's less of a contraction. That's what that really means. Remember, the Liquor Control Act is out there. The state has laws regulating the sale of liquor and the distribution of liquor. All we can do, even as a home rule community, is take rights away from people. And that makes sense in some places because the Liquor Control Act is very liberal in some respects, and certainly more so than most communities permit. But where you're seeing an expansion of abilities of our licensees as compared to the existing code is the outdoor sales provisions are modified. Right now, there's very little authority and very little methodology for allowing outdoor sales. You've got to have a 5-foot, 6-foot fence, and it's unwieldy. So there's a process for allowing that to be done in an orderly fashion based on the specific property. There's been an expansion, proposed expansion of, well, potentially licensees. Gas stations right now are limited to beer and wine. That's been taken away. They're a market. They can sell packaged liquor if they want. And in some extent, in some circumstances, they can actually get a license to pour. We'll get into that a little bit. And that's part of the reason for the definitions, the differential between the restaurant and the limited restaurant. We've retained the temporary license structure generally, but expanded that to address issues such as Winefest, Brewfest, and that sort of thing when we've got outside vendors. And then the idea is we are streamlining the application and renewal process. So with all of this, you've got 2 ordinances in front of you. And I'm going to backpedal a little bit, and I'm going to start off easy. You've got an ordinance amending the codified ordinances of the City of Freeport regarding parklets and sidewalk cafes. That's one of your 2. Now, this, I call it the fix. This was through Planning Commission last week. It was unanimously approved. What it does is it resolves the issue that we ran into with parklets when we tried to authorize one this fall. The problem was one which is not readily apparent. The parklet ordinance was well considered, well written, and then it ran into the zoning code. It required 2 special uses for a parklet. One was a special use for liquor. Of course, if you're serving liquor, you've got a special use for liquor. That's everywhere in town. What was unintended, I believe, is there was a special use required for outdoor sales of food, which is required in conjunction with the sale of liquor. Well, what the proposed change does is it removes that restriction. So all we're doing here is saying that in B1, which is the least restrictive business zoning, remember this propagates up, so if it's allowed in B1, it's allowed in B2, and it's allowed in B3. It simply names a validly permitted sidewalk cafe or parklet as a permitted use. So there's no special use process. It effectively takes those things, it keeps them as an administrative process and takes them out of zoning, which was the intent all along. So that's where that fix shows up. And then there's some slight modifications while we had the ordinance open, address parklets, just conformed that. You'll see the change in 103403, conform that to the new language of the license, provided a carve out if they've already got an insurance policy, and increased the amount of liability insurance required from $1 million to $2 million, which is a fairly standard combined single limit commercial policy.
Excuse me, Alderman Clem.
Steve, I just want to ask you a question, or really point out what you just said about the sidewalk, or about sidewalk cafes, the parklets, or this and that. To the owner of a liquor establishment, that was about 3 months' time and a minimum of $1,000 to get all that stuff going. The licenses, the special meetings, special fees, then if somebody didn't show up for a quorum. So I know we worked at one over at the VFW, and it was a minimum 4 months type thing. Without, and then remember all the special delivery letters that have to go out to everybody to get feedback that they've been notified and all that. So that's really a big change when you look at it.
The concept behind the parklet, if the council remembers, because that was one of the first ordinances I work on, it was you were basically you gave me the ability to review it and approve it, but then when I went to approve Mort's, I figured out I really didn't have the power to approve it. It had to go back to the planning commission for their approval, which then had to come back to council. So it really took the power away from judging whether a parklet needed to be approved or not.
Madam Chair?
And Attorney Cox, I have one question, then I'll go to Alderman Chesney also. What made us increase the requirement for the $2 million insurance as opposed to the $1 million insurance?
I think that was generally a,
One of your students has.
Tim. Yeah, Tim did.
Okay.
And that is a fairly standard, typically a commercial liability policy is going to be $1 million per occurrence and $2 million combined single limits.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Chesney.
Go ahead, Pete. I think you're
Oh, excuse me.
first.
McClanathan?
Thank you. You've talked about the insurance a couple times, and I noted you referenced not having the city as an additional insured both for sidewalk cafes and for parklets. Is that accurate? And if that's accurate, what's the thought process on the parklets where they're out in the street and not having the city as an additional insured?
Actually, it's the opposite.
Okay.
The city is named additional insured on sidewalk cafes and parklets.
Oh.
So that's the intent.
Okay.
The regular liquor code requirement does not require the city be named as additional insured because it's private property. Where the city becomes at risk is when we're allowing liquor sales on public property such as sidewalks and parklets.
So we are leaving that in?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
good. Thanks.
Thank you for that clarification. Alderman Chesney.
I'm okay.
Okay. Please, continue.
Okay. And then sidewalk cafes, you'll see 1026.17. We had language in there. First of all, the insurance language exactly mirrors the parklet insurance language, so they're identical, and that was the change there. The other modification was that we had this set of requirements that were very well considered and well set out for parklets. That was in Chapter 1034. But the sidewalk cafe had this vague statement about community development would come up with a set of rules and regulations, basically throwing it all on Nancy's lap. And to my knowledge, those regulations, I don't know that they exist. Well, what this does is it simply takes the sidewalk cafes and cites over to the parklets. All right, we've already got that code section. So let's just cite back over to that and have unified requirements for sidewalk cafes and parklets. They're both on public property. They're both the same concerns. You're going to clean up your stuff. You're not going to have loud music. You're going to close at 10 p.m. All of those things that are contained in parklets just carry over to sidewalks. I should note, what I wanted to do, what I thought made sense was somehow let's combine these two, right? Well, one thing I came across while I was reviewing the ordinance is it very specifically says, and you come across this fairly rarely in legislation, very specifically says, if you are a sidewalk cafe or a parklet, you have to have either or both. It states that. So at some point the council considered that and made a decision that we want these to be separate things. So that stays. So I didn't mess with that at all. So you would theoretically, so if you wanted a parklet and a sidewalk cafe, you would come in and you would get a parklet license and a sidewalk cafe license. Now, that sounds like a pain, but remember, we conform to the requirements. So if you meet one, you meet the other. So it's one application, and a lot of the user-friendly aspect of this is going to be a matter of streamlining these applications. You'll notice when we get to the temporary licenses, the T licenses, those trigger a special event permit. But we're going to have a combined application for that. So it's just a matter of internal routing and who gets a say in terms of the process. So if you had a sidewalk cafe and a parklet, so you would also need an outdoor sales permit. We haven't got to that yet, but you would need an outdoor sales permit as well. So that's $100 a pop. So it's $300 total. You've got your sidewalk cafe from May 1 to November 1. And it just goes through City Hall. You don't need to go through zoning process. You don't need to do a whole bunch of rigmarole. So you would have to go in for a one-time application on the outdoor, that goes through Liquor Commission on the outdoor sales, and that's subject to review by the PD and fire department. Once that configuration is approved, then that's just going to be a fairly regular annual renewal. So it's a one-time deal, $300 a year. And hopefully that's going to be a lot cleaner than the way we have it now.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman Chesney.
Thanks. Steve, during the course of this 10-month review, is there any standing objection to this from any current licensees? Any feedback? I know that people have consulted you personally on this to try to get clarification, but what's general feedback been from those that this is going to impact?
Very positive. Very positive. And to the extent there's been any negative feedback, we've taken into the Liquor Commission has taken it under advisement and has addressed it. So if there's something that wasn't liked about the existing code, it was addressed. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, you actually see one of the examples. You see an edit in front of you, which I'll get to, which actually changes the ordinance a little bit based on the last Liquor Commission meeting we had. Just some input from some community members that it was thought, well, we've still got this open. Let's make these fixes now, before it becomes an issue. So, that input has been taken into account.
And then we've seen historically on agendas that we have people that have licenses that are not paying on time or are delinquent. Given that we're offering more latitude and flexibility for the business, what are we doing to ensure people are promptly paying? If they're not, how's the commission going to handle that?
Excellent question, and we've taken.
I agree.
We've taken away the ability to pay late. In other words, you pay once. Right now, we've got an odd amount on an annual fee, and it's split. So you pay half at the beginning and half at the end. That goes away. You pay at the renewal, and that's that.
And if they don't pay?
They don't get renewed.
Same thing with food and beverage tax. We've had some issues with food and beverage.
Yes. So if you're delinquent on anything to the city, theoretically, even water and sewer, so you haven't paid your water bill at the establishment, you're not going to get renewed because you're in arrears with the city.
Because we found that in reviewing this, many of the same businesses that were late on their food and beverage tax were also late on their water bills. But yet we weren't shutting them off because they were a business.
Yeah.
Chair?
Alderman Keister.
Just real quickly, a few years ago, a big issue came up about the brown bag law in the state of Illinois and the fact that we do not allow that in Freeport. Now, what I'm looking at is 608.05, consumption on licensed premises. Does that cover that, or is this going to be permitted in this, or what is it covered at all in this?
Just make sure I've got the right section here.
Because in Alderman Clem, correct?
BYOB.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but the general consensus of the public was pretty unanimous that they did not want it in the city of Freeport. So, I mean, I want to see if it's covered in this or if it's allowed in this, because I know that there was, I know personally, I got a lot of feedback on that.
Well, the interesting, it's a great question, and it's something that was considered. BYOB is, of course, legal anywhere that's not a licensed establishment. So that's actually the liquor code. So the liquor code says, look, if you're a licensed establishment and you're authorized to sell liquor, nobody can bring liquor onto that premises and consume it. The issue is what happens with simply a place that's not licensed. That becomes a very difficult thing to regulate. And it wasn't addressed under the prior ordinance, and it was specifically determined not to address it under this ordinance. Here's why. When we start addressing that sort of issue, it becomes very difficult to differentiate between taking a bottle of wine into a restaurant, and many communities allow that, and my taking a six-pack over to a buddy's to watch the game. What's the difference? Neither one of them are licensed. So it becomes, you start stepping into this quicksand as you start trying to define it. It can be done. It can absolutely be done. But it is far from trivial, and I think the Liquor Commission just decided that it's not addressed currently. It hasn't been a problem. Let's leave it alone. If it starts becoming an issue, at that point, I will guarantee you that they will instruct me to bring something back in front of this council.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, when we were discussing at that time, as I understand it, it is legal in Illinois unless the communities themselves specifically pass an ordinance against having it, which Freeport has, as far as I know. Because at that time, they were and Alderman Clem helped me out here, if I remember correctly, that one business was all asking us to repeal that ordinance so they could have it.
If I
Alderman Clem.
I don't think there's anything in writing that ever went through that we couldn't. This is it, at one point, wanted to get, to have that as a license, and it was voted down not to do it. But I think right now in the city of Freeport, it's not available to do.
And for the listening public, Mr. Mahoney is shaking his head no, that at this time we do not have an ordinance against it. But at this time, we're not addressing it in the packet that we're looking at for this to move forward, correct?
Correct.
Is there anybody that wants to poke that bear right now and add that to there, or are we just going to let that ride at this time? According to the commission, it sounded like they didn't want to address it at this time.
Madam Chair.
Alderman Keister.
I think it's something we need to address as a separate issue, because like I said, if I'm not mistaken, we can pass an ordinance to prohibit it in Freeport, which at the time we had it, general consensus I got from the people that talked to me was that's what they wanted anyway, and at that time I understood that's what we had. So I think we need to address this at another time with a separate ordinance prohibiting it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cox?
That's really about it for the parklet fix. Like I said, that's the easy one. One thing that the Planning Commission did want me to advise the council of, this was a quick pass. There's some questions about how Parklet and Sidewalk Cafe interact that they would like to address. I assured them that they were not foreclosed from addressing that issue at a later date, but they wanted to make it clear that they were 100% okay with this being presented, but being presented as a fix in conjunction with the liquor rewrite.
Good.
So,
Alderman Ross.
I mean, if you want to go ahead and finish it, I'll ask my question.
I'm wrapped up on that, Alderman.
Okay. Here goes a question from a long time ago. I didn't see it in here. On who can serve and who cannot serve.
That's an excellent question. According to the state of Illinois, once you're 18, you can serve. That's the Liquor Control Act. As a matter of fact, I believe according to the state of Illinois, under the Liquor Control Act, if you're 18, you can be on premises in an establishment that serves alcohol. It's just that I believe every municipality, or darn close to every municipality in the state of Illinois, has passed a 21 bar entrance, with a couple of notable exceptions, I believe. So that's very, very liberal. Now, what our ordinance does is it states that if you are certain licensees, in other words, a tavern, then you need to have somebody in there that's 21 years old serving, and everybody needs to be Bassett trained. That's a new requirement that came down, I think, June 1.
I know that they would give the bar owners, I think, 3 years to comply, but it went into effect.
It was actually a stepped implementation, and we went in. Because of the community size, we went in this year. So everybody has to be Bassett certified. Make sure I answer Alderman Ross's question correctly.
So basically what I'm saying, if you got a 21-year-old bartender and you got a 17-year-old waitress.
My understanding is the waitress could not carry alcohol. She has to be at least 18. Is that correct if it's a food establishment?
My understanding is the waitress can't pour and she can't ring it up. She could deliver it.
She can serve as long as she's 18 years of age, or no?
I'm trying to see if we've got we address that specifically. Because I don't think that is the case under the Liquor Control Act. It goes to serving alcohol, not necessarily delivering it. So, and there's a difference. And serving it is selling it or pouring it. So
Okay.
if somebody brings you a closed beer or an already poured glass of wine, you can actually have, particularly in the rental halls, you can have under 18s. And I know in those circumstances you can.
Does that answer your question, Alderman Ross?
Partially.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't.
Partially. That was always a question with a gray area.
I'm trying to see if we addressed it specifically here. And we did?
Okay, excuse me. If you want to speak, you must go to the microphone. Thank you. It's being
I'm not sure
recorded.
what ordinance it is or what statutes it is under, but if you're a food establishment and a tavern as well, you can employ under 21 persons that can serve or deliver the alcohol to the table as well as the food. That person has to be 18.
Right.
Only in the establishments that sell food.
And Madam Clerk, the speaker is Jeff Davis, Commissioner. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
yes, thank you. And thank you for the time to find the right site. And I believe this is a restatement of our existing ordinance.
Okay.
This is in 608.02. And if you go to L, towards the bottom of the second page there, you cannot employ or permit any person under the age of 21 to draw, pour, or mix. So, in other words, interact with the alcohol. Now, in terms of having somebody employed that is under the age of 21 or even 18, that's okay, as long as they don't interact with it. If they just deliver it to you, that's okay. But if they're pulling the tap, if they're opening a bottle, that's no good.
Thank you.
Now, does that answer your question, Alderman Ross?
It worked. Clear as the window.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cox, for that explanation, and Commissioner. Please continue.
Okay. So that's the easy part. The more in-depth review, I will at this point pause and give the council the opportunity to beg for mercy on this. I can go through this at length. You give me a time period that you would like me to review this, and I will get it done in that time period, subject to questions. Would you like the 15-minute version or the half-hour version or the 3-hour version?
We would like the,
Say the last time I talked one issue, one thing on warning council, it took me an hour to get him on the phone.
We want the 3-minute version.
we want the 3-minute, we want the
I don't have
the
that.
Cliff Notes. You don't have a Cliff Notes?
The Cliff Notes would be about the 15-minute version.
Yeah, no, and I completely understand. You spent many hours on this,
there's-
so please proceed.
There's issues on issues, and that's the deeper we dive, the more issues there are. So what I will do is I'll go through this as quickly as possible, and with the caveat that please, if you have something that you saw in the notes or that you have questions on, please stop me.
May I say one more thing, Council? If you would like him to finish within that 15 minutes, please write your questions down, maybe. That would, if we go to the end, that way we don't keep reiterating. Would that be all right? Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, starting off, 80601, definitions. You'll notice that's a lot shorter than what we have now. What I did is pulled in all the definitions from the Illinois Liquor Control Act. What that does is it makes our ordinance self-amending. So if the Liquor Control Act changes, our ordinance changes, and it tracks right along with that. The only definitions you see in there are derivative definitions that are either specific to Freeport or are slight modifications of what the Liquor Control Act states. Jumping right into the licenses, I started off by saying, look, let's drill down tore this down to the 3 basic licenses. Now, there's 5 in that tier 1, but you've got a tavern, which, by the way, we have maybe 1, maybe 2 true taverns in the city of Freeport right now. Everybody's an AR. And the reason they're ARs, of course, is because of the gaming license. But when you think about it, there are very few bars in this area which are true taverns. Most of them are going to fall under restaurant and a package store. The new concept you're going to see in there, though, is the limited restaurant. I addressed that a little bit in my introductory comments, that those are restaurants, but not full-service restaurants as we think about. Now, this is where the breakdown came and why you have the change in front of you between Category 1 and Category 2. My read on Category 1 food service establishment, according to the county health code, was very clear. If you handle raw foods, in other words, you're a restaurant, you're preparing things from scratch, then you're a Category 1. Well, turns out that's not the interpretation the health department uses. We found that out through the input of some licensees, and that's good because it allowed me to address that here rather than finding out there was a problem later. So Category 2 deals with limited assembly of foods. Well, it turns out most of our short order establishments, which is most of our bars, burger and fries and that sort of thing, are going to be Cat 2s. But also within Cat 2 are the sub shops, the larger gas stations and things like that, which the commission very clearly would like to have at least licensed to sell beer and wine. So the idea is you go to, I'll pick on Quiznos, for instance. You go to a sub shop, and there's a cooler at the end of the line. You open it up, and you can have a beer with your lunch. And that's very much the case in many communities. And that's the sort of thing that the Liquor Commission wants to do to provide more avenues for local businesses to make some money. And really don't see any problems developing with that we don't already have. So the idea with the LR is if you're going to have that, the beer and wine place, you don't necessarily want them, serving mixed drinks and shots and that sort of thing and having a full service bar. So that's the difference between the R and the LR, and it's really the only difference. You're still paying the same fee and you're still eligible for gaming. There's also a separate brew pub and wine retailer license, but that's essentially a tavern license. That's just required to speed things along for their application for the state. You've got Tier 2 licenses, which are beer and wine only. If you're only selling beer and you're only selling wine, that's fine. You can do that. You pay less for your license. Caterer and rental hall, we have both of these now. We have 0 catering licenses. If you haven't already done so, take a close look at that provision. Licensing a caterer is difficult because you're licensing somebody to sell liquor on wheels. But the positive to that and the real community good in that is if you've got a caterer, you've got a licensed professional with something on the line serving things, they're going to do a heck of a lot better job at that graduation party when they're catering wings and they've also got the keg behind the counter than Uncle Joe's going to have with the keg sitting out in the garage where all the kids can get at it. So it provides a level of supervision and control. So it's a good thing. We just need to attract our local caterers to get the license. So we've tried to do that by keeping the fee low and making the process streamlined. Rental hall license hasn't changed that much. Tier 4 is just Park Hills. You notice that provision, by the way, has been pared down quite a bit. There's a great deal of language on the T4 about what the Park District could and couldn't do. Well, all they really need to do is get a T license. If they want to have an event, they can get a T1 at a very nominal charge, and it just goes through the regular process. There's no reason to differentiate that from anything else. So basically that Tier 4 was just there to keep the Park District where they're at. I'm going to jump ahead before we get to the temporary licenses to 80604. Those are the supplemental licenses. So by tearing things down to the base level with just the tavern, package, and restaurant licenses, well, you have to allow our establishments to do what they're doing. So case in point, a Class A right now has on-premises and off-premises. You actually can't elect out of off-premises sales. Under the current ordinance, you can, and you would actually pay a little bit less than you're paying now. So it's $1,130 some dollars, I remember, now for an annual fee. If you are just an A, you're paying $1,000, but if you want an A plus package sales, which is what you have now, you're actually paying a little bit more, $1,250. So you have the option to sort of pick and choose what applies to you. So again, package sales are add-ons for the A and the R licenses and the LR. The last add-on is outdoor. I'll come back to gaming. The last license is outdoor sales. What that does is, as I said before, when addressing the expansion, is it allows each place to sort of custom tailor its outdoor sales. Right now, we have a one-size-fits-all ordinance. If you want to sell outside, you put up a 5-foot fence, you do this, you control entry. The examples I would give, as I was working through this very specifically, which came to mind, are Eilert's and Tony's, which are pretty much across the street from one another. You look at Eilert's, and there's 200 feet of front yard there, right? I mean, there's a frontage. So if something was put in there, it's not going to push those boundaries into anybody's backyard. It's not going to do much anything, and it can be controlled, and there aren't going to be people strolling in from the street. If you go across the street to Tony's, you're in more of a residential neighborhood, outdoor sales there, that can be more problematic. Not that it can't be done, it just needs to be controlled differently. So what this allows is each of those individual owners can come to the Liquor Commission. There's a one-time approval process. You get your plan, and there you go. So it allows us to tailor the use to the location. And I'm sure that the licensees are going to be more creative than we could be in terms of what's going to work and especially what's going to work for them. So circling back to the gaming, Mr. Mahoney handled those questions very well. One thing that keeps popping in my mind when we talk about this numeric cap is the cap in and of itself isn't the control. So to use the ridiculous extreme, okay, if the city council would have passed a cap with nothing more, okay, we could have had 25 gaming parlors and no bars with games, theoretically. That's not what the council did, of course. They passed a cap, and they passed specific controls and requirements. The idea of passing those controls and requirements are to ensure that the businesses which come in are businesses which we want to support. Specifically, the sale of food and beverage. One thing that we hear constantly is we need more entertainment, we need more places to eat, we need more places to go out in this town. So what we've done is taken a source of revenue which some like, some don't like, but it's there. And we've taken that source of revenue and made it available to businesses that may otherwise be struggling and allow them to use this revenue, which is available to support this type of business, which is viewed as favorable within the community. So under the circumstance with the percentages, the limitation on sales being 50%, the audit process, what we're doing is creating a check on this type of business. We hear about the parlors. A parlor's not going to get in under this analysis. And if we feel that a parlor is going to get in under the analysis, I would suggest we tighten up the screws on the requirements, not simply impose a cap. Because once we get this definition down right, if the council is comfortable with the definition that we have, by definition, anybody that we keep out with the cap is somebody that we would approve of. So we're just stopping a business from coming in that we've already decided fits the mold of what we want to come in. So I would urge the council to consider it in that light and work at strictly defining those terms and in getting that to where you're comfortable with it, rather than imposing the cap. Because the cap, as I said, and as Mr. Mahoney pointed out, there's good businesses and there's bad businesses. We have We have both, and both apply. So what we want to do is make sure that we aren't promoting one over the other unintentionally. So
Temporary licenses, are we going back to?
temporary licenses, T1s, T2s, T3s. The T1 goes to a slight difference in the definition, but not much in terms of the application. It goes to a 501c organization. That's not necessarily a 501c3. It could be a 501c anything, but they're all charitable qualified businesses. It could be a political committee. It could be a labor union. It could be whatever, as long as it's a 501c. A T2 is an existing licensee, and a T3 is something we don't have currently. We have a T3, but I think that was specifically it's for the Park District or something. But the T3 specifically deals with out-of-town licensees. In other words, they're licensed in another community, and they want to come into town in Freeport for a festival, beer fest, wine fest, that sort of thing. That is something that's allowed under the liquor code. They can get that license through the state, so we're allowing them to get that with us locally, and it addresses the problems that we've run into with Beer Fest and Wine Fest and not being able to sell from the specific locations where those vendors are at. Of course, the schedule of fees starts at the lowest of T1, goes up a little bit to the T2, and then much higher on the T3 because they haven't already paid us a license fee. We're favoring the local licensees on the T2 with the fees.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman
Quick question.
Chesney.
Sure.
Hey, Steve, under the Park District license, it says that the licenses shall authorize the sale of beer, wine. Was there a reason that we didn't extend that to other liquors?
Isn't currently.
I understand, but
I don't think it was considered. I think it was just, that was generally left alone. And I don't know that I really discussed it.
I don't think they've ever asked for anything other than that.
No.
But I just was wondering if that would be, I'm not saying that the golf course would be interested in that, but I don't know that we necessarily would want to restrict them either. I don't understand what the benefit would be.
I don't have a good answer for that, honestly. My intention with the Park District was just to leave it alone. But if, I think that would certainly be well within the spirit of what the commission has done here, if that was to be opened up. I mean, I doubt the Park District would object.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Alderman Keister.
Just real quickly, probably not a bad idea to look into it, but most of the public golf courses that I've been to and stuff, it's only been beer or wine, that there hasn't been any alcoholic beverages there. And from what I've seen and the amount of time I've spent out at Park Hills and stuff, I don't really think there's probably, I mean, it's worth checking with them, but I really don't think there's a desire to have any hard liquor out there. Just the beer and wine is probably what, all they really want.
And honestly, I think, circling back to Alderman Chesney's question, I think the answer just popped into my head there. That's the way it always is, right? You go to a golf course and you get beer and wine, and it's rare that you get a mixed drink in the clubhouse, but it's also not unheard of. So it
probably wouldn't hurt to have it available to them and offer to them if they want it, but, you know, to change it right now without talking to them first and stuff, I think is probably premature.
I think it certainly would be something we could run by them.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Alderman McClanathan.
Thank you. The main question I had remaining, I know you got other aspects of it, but was looking at the limited, the LR there. Can you run through what an LR would look like? I know it's got category 1 and category 2, but how does it look like, particularly as we're talking about gas stations, the application of gaming in those situations? What is and isn't practically going to happen on this?
With the gaming set up right now, according to the state, anybody that sells liquor anywhere can get a gaming license. So, you know, we're peeling things back. Right now, our ordinance would not allow that because they are not a restaurant, okay? So the idea with the LR was specifically to address that issue, which is the truck stop style gas station, and you can think of the ones around town that we have that serve food, that have, where you can buy cooked food behind a counter, that sort of thing, that may want to take advantage of that. In fact, we've been petitioned by one already regarding that. So what an LR would look like if they wanted to have gaming is they would have to have at least a Category 2 license. So the Category 3, that's snacks and that sort of thing, which the current ordinance actually prohibits that. Now it's just a definitional issue. But they would have to have at least a Category 2. Then there would be that threshold between whether they could get a full R or an LR. Probably they wouldn't even try. They just get an LR so they could serve wine and beer. Then they have to have the seating requirements. Now, one thing that you're going to see in here is the seating requirements have actually been reduced a little bit too by the Liquor Commission. It was 32 seats for 320 square feet. That's pretty big. I mean, when you look at an ancillary. Now, if it's a restaurant itself, fine. But when you're talking about a smaller sub shop or, I think of, say, Subway or something like that, trying to meet 300 square feet, that's tough, in that area. So the smaller places, you can get that with 20 seats. So it's still a fairly serious, but it's 20 feet or 20 seats, 200 square feet. So they would have to have a separate area for seating, would have to qualify as a restaurant, and then be regularly open to the public, that sort of thing. And then a separate area yet for gaming. So it's quite an investment of floor space, if not money in terms of a build out. So all of that would be sort of separate from the market area. Frankly, I don't know what that looks like either, but I do know what truck stops look like. They'll have a separate room off to the side, and I think that's kind of what the commission had in mind in terms of developing.
So if we're gonna, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So if we're gonna see this on an LR, it's going to not only have to meet the Category 1 or 2 on it, it's gonna have to have the separate seating for the food, and it's gonna have the separate area for the gaming. So a very narrow application.
Mr. Mahoney would like to weigh in on this one.
Thanks. So this was specifically brought to our attention by the Shell liaison that came to one of these open meetings that we had. It was the liaison for Shell for all of the state of Illinois, and all she does is go around and talk to various cities regarding the development. She followed up with me with a series of emails and information. So number one, this is being done in other communities where a place like Shell will not only serve have gas, but they'll have food, and then they have gaming. They have one in Milan, and they have one up in Davis. And she invited us to go take a look at them, and I went and took a look at both of them as I was tooling about. And they do have all of these separate sections. Shell indicated that they would be more than willing to buy a full-fledged liquor license, the $10,000 liquor license, and pay the renewals and do all of those things. The part that really intrigued me is she said, if we're allowed to do this, we will draw business away from the parlors. Oh, really? I said, how is that the case? Well, she actually emailed me studies showing that that was the case, and the difference between them and the parlors is they had lottery. So in fact, they did have studies showing that when they open up in communities, the parlors dropped and it went to them as opposed to the parlors. And I specifically asked the other licensees that were there, would you guys have a problem with that? Which they all went, nope, we don't have a problem with that. So hence how that came to be.
Chair?
Yes, Alderman Chesney.
Steve, can we circle back to the parlors just briefly? What mechanism do we have of, I know we can prevent it moving forward, but I don't necessarily accept the position that we can do nothing about the ones we have. But so is there any mechanism the council can consider that is legal and ethical that can be implemented to?
Once you do that, you're starting to take rights away that have already been granted. So you do have You do have a license which renews on an annual basis. You could, right now, the ordinance grandfathers in all of our AVs, which I think there's more than two, but there really don't need to be more than two. There's two of them that are not really, that wouldn't qualify as an AR. So what you could do is remove the grandfather provision. Those establishments would not qualify under the new ordinance. But then you've changed an ordinance which affects an existing use. So the argument would be that that is a legal non-conforming use. Now that's different because it's not zoning, it's licensing. But I think the same argument would apply from the licensee's standpoint. What I would suggest, if you want to be serious about that, is maybe take an approach to phasing them out, make them non-transferable, as was previously the case with the drive-throughs. You could address it that way without specifically affecting somebody's rights presently.
Madam Chair.
Alderman Keister.
Yeah, real quickly, when you were discussing about, like with Shell and stuff, with the different setups they had for the machines, are you requiring in this order, and I haven't looked at that part, but are you requiring a separate room for that? Or like I see a lot of places, they just have a sectioned off area? I mean, I've seen it done both ways. To me, I mean, both of them seem to be effective. To me, requiring them to build a separate room for that is kind of maybe a little cost prohibitive.
Correct, and that is not required. Okay. That is not required. It just needs to be a separate area. So, I don't know about you. I always chuckle a little bit when I see the little velvet rope by the games, but it would need to be, and we would have some oversight in terms of, well, is that really a separate area, or did you put chairs in the aisles? I think somebody trying to short circuit the requirements would be pretty obvious. So there needs to be a separate floor space that's not part of the retail space.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman Keister.
I think the only other thing I've seen in those areas that would help regulate it and ensure that it's a section off space is majority of them have cameras on the area so that you can monitor it and regulate it, so that you can ensure that it is just the people who are supposed to be back there.
And I believe that might be required by the Games Commission.
Possible, I don't know.
Excuse me, you have to speak into the microphone if you'd like to speak. It has to be for public.
When I get in trouble with
Repeat
the
yourself.
judge.
He's tough.
Wow.
Please repeat yourself, Mr. Mahoney.
I get in trouble with the judge all the time. And remember, they would still have to, they would be a full-fledged liquor license, so they still have to be 50%. They got to have the food requirements, they got to do all that stuff. I mean, so, this, again, they're not going to operate as a parlor. They would have to fulfill all of those things. So it would be, all of the things that are required of a Class A or any of those would still have to be fulfilled by Shell.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney. That's all right.
To follow up on Mr. Mahoney's comment, the 50%, I wasn't going to dive down too far on this, but I think it is relevant. The requirement that you see in front of you with the 50% is actually a little bit more lenient than 35%. It works the other way. Right now, 35% of your revenue or less can be from gaming. What the Liquor Commission is proposing is it's 50%. Now, that change, there's two reasons for that. One, the idea is, well, 35%, that's kind of that's a tough number. It's not intuitive. And the idea is, look, the gaming revenue is secondary to a viable, desirable business. So it's not the primary business, it's secondary. So less than 50%. Note, in this ordinance, we're requiring that an accountant provide a statement at the time of renewal that 50% or more of the revenue was derived from some other source, and that's food and beverage, which is not required now. And to my knowledge, I don't believe there has been any. The city has the right, of course, to audit books and that sort of thing. I don't know that that's ever been demanded of a licensee. So we're requiring that proof be provided at the time of renewal. My concern, and I believe the Liquor Commission's concern, is that that may actually prove a bit problematic, even at the 50% level. We don't know. We're hoping it's not. But it's something that's there that's like many things. It's there. It's so difficult to enforce, it's not. It's just simply hasn't been enforced. So our idea here is, look, if we're going to put these limits in, let's make them real. Let's make them real limits. So another one of the changes that you see in front of you that are my edits. This is coming between the last Liquor Commission and to this committee. So I would ask, what I'm asking with that red line that you have in front of you is that this committee adopt those changes. One of those changes is also at the recommendation and after discussion at the Liquor Commission last week, that we created a safe harbor. So I was shying away from requiring a CPA certification for every licensee because, let's face it, many of them probably don't use a CPA, the smaller ones. And I wanted to stop short of mandating that. And so my language originally just had accountant in there. What this does is goes a little bit farther, and it creates a safe harbor if you use a CPA. And it allows the Liquor Commission, you still have to present a statement by an accountant. It just allows the Liquor Commission to demand a CPA audit, which we have the right to do now. So if you already presented a CPA audit, fine, great. You know, we aren't going to question that unless we have reason to. And likely, as long as it's looks like a coherent analysis by somebody who's actually qualified, probably that's going to be good enough. But it gives us the opportunity to double check. So again, I think just sort of a heads up for renewal time next year, you know, we may need to take a look at whether that number works and how it's enforced. And then if it doesn't work, what's to be done. But we'll see.
Chair?
Alderman Chesney.
Do you have a little bit more to go on this, Steve, or we pretty much wrapped up?
You know, once we get past the temporary licenses, a lot of this is technical, so I can blast through that very quickly if there's substantive questions.
Please blast away.
Quick, yeah, okay.
Your 15 minutes are
We might have more questions for you at the end, but.
Okay. So just going through quickly, 80607, I've worked with, that's applications and renewals. I've worked with Dovey on that to try to streamline that. We think that's pretty good. Transfers, there is no such thing as a license transfer with a liquor license. What we were doing before is waiving the fee in certain circumstances and collecting a fee where there wasn't really a change of ownership. So think about a corporation. If you sell shares in that corporation, the corporation's still the licensee. You could sell 99%, 100% of the shares. That's not a new license. So what was happening, my understanding is the reason that the rule was imposed the way it was is if there's more than a 50% transfer, we're capturing a new license fee to stop people from just conveying stock, interest in the business via stock versus asset sales. So we're still capturing that, but we're not charging a fee on a new license in two circumstances. One, if you form an entity or dissolve an entity and the ownership percentage doesn't change. That's exactly as written now. That's what we do now. Also adding gift to a lineal descendant, so you pass it down to your kids. That's a different license, not a new fee. Where we're charging a new fee is any transfer of any interest. So if you transfer 1% of stock, technically that triggers a new fee with exceptions. One is if there's a transfer because of a divorce, and it's pursuant to court order. Two, transfer to stock of a family member due to death. We actually had one of those with one of our licensees this year, and that's in the existing. And then a new concept, less than 50% transfer of stock in 3 years. The old ordinance just said 50% transfer. And I can tell you that that was a point of contention with some licensees because I was on the other side of those arguments a couple of times. The other ordinance didn't say 50% when. Is it per year? Is it forever? What is it? So what the new ordinance allows is 50% transfer within 3 years. So if you've got multiple partners, say you've got 4 partners, even even ownership, somebody sells, that doesn't trigger, that's 25% sale, that doesn't trigger anything, as long as the next guy doesn't sell within that 3 years. So it allows for this rolling transfer and a turnover of ownership within an existing corporate licensee. But if you sell substantially all the assets, that's a sale, we're getting a new fee. We already covered in 608 the minors on premises. The rest of the transfers in 80, or the rest of the provisions in 806 are technical in nature. I'm happy to answer questions on any of that. Chapter 844, you're getting into the mechanical games licenses. Currently, our V licenses are housed in Chapter 844 and Chapter 806. They kind of straddle the differential. They're actually permitted under 844 as mechanical games. What this redraft does is it pulls the video gambling machines completely out of 844. That wasn't what it was designed for. We don't need local control of those, the technical aspects of those games. They're regulated to the hilt by the state. We don't need to, unless there's some specific concern about how those games operate mechanically, there's no reason to apply that. So they're pulled out. There's also a provision there that we're waiving the fee if you do both. Okay, we're hitting the video gaming licensees for a higher fee this year. So we don't want to double dip and hit them for the $250 fee on mechanical games if they've got video golf or something like that, and then get them for $250 on the video gambling as well. So what we think of is the classic video games, video golf, darts, the crane games, whatever. Those are all still licensed under 844, and that provision still stands as is. We're just pulling the video gambling out and waiving the fee, so we don't double up there. Also cleaned a little bit of language up while it was open, and I want to get back to something that Chief brought up now that I'm thinking about it. But in 84403, we had a situation come up where somebody asked about tournament gaming. Esports are getting bigger and bigger. And there's actually Attorney General provisions or decisions on point that say that is not gambling, it's a game of skill. It's not a game of chance, it's a game of skill. Our current draft of 84403 excludes game of skill. So it says that you can't do that either. So I pulled that out. So that would allow, because we did have this come up, in a request for that. Yeah.
Manager Crow, I can't hear you.
Local computer shop wants to, on Friday and Saturday nights, run video gaming tournaments, and he's approached us. He approached us last year, Steve and I, about changing the ordinance, and we modified the ordinance accordingly.
And this fully addresses that then?
Yes, just pulling a couple words out fixes it.
Thank you.
So my thought is, while I had the ordinance open, let's fix it. So that's the reason for that change. Similarly, in 874 tobacco, the only reason that's there tonight is because it referenced a B1 and a B2 license. So it needed to be cleaned up, and you see a line through on that. Because we don't have B1 and B2 licenses anymore, it's just package sales. However, as Chief was reviewing the ordinance, he brought up a problem that they run into, specifically in 87403, and that's the review of the surveillance equipment. That surveillance equipment, right now, the language says that the licensee has to be able to access the operational knowledge of the surveillance equipment. The problem is the licensee has that, which is the owner. And when the PD goes in, they don't have the owner there. They've got
an employee,
whoever the clerk is at the time. So the suggested change in that would be all licensees are required to have on premises at all times a person with operational knowledge. So just adding that provision while we've got the ordinance open solves a problem for the police department that they've been struggling with. So I think that makes perfect sense to address that, even though it's a little bit outside of the scope of the liquor license. We are looking at amending that ordinance, and I think good a time as any to do that. And I can certainly make that change and have it in plenty of time for the council packet. And with that, I've run out of specifics to address. Now, I did gloss a lot in 806.
Thank you, Mr. Cox, and that will open up questions from the council. I did appreciate you blasting through that last part. Alderman Chesney?
Motion to move it forward.
We have a motion from Alderman Chesney to move this forward to the next regularly scheduled council meeting, which will be Tuesday, February 20th, according to the mayor. And we have a second by Alderman Busker. Is that correct? All those in favor?
Aye.
Discussion?
Gotta have discussion, Carol.
Excuse me?
Pardon me, gotta have discussion.
Please forgive me. Alderman Clem,
no,
let's have
that's no
discussion.
I have no problem on supporting this to moving it forward. I got 3 questions that I'd like to get answers to over the next, before we vote on it, and I don't think, with as much as at stake, I'd probably say, I don't know as if we need to ramrod it through as, next time in one session, but that's up to all the people. I still have one of the same questions, Alderman Chesney, that you have, is maybe now's the time to ask it. Would the park be interested in liquor? You got that in?
I've already got that down as a question that I'm going to ask based upon the discussion.
Okay. I still have problems in 2 areas, and like I say, it's just a matter of discussion is all it is. Number one is we've always had discussion before on this, the places, I want to say the gas stations on beer and wine to have liquor. There's a couple different ways you can go on that. I just have a problem with the guy saying, give me a hamburger and an order of french fries and give me a bottle of Jack for the road. It just, something in that thing is just.
Attorney Mahoney, yes, please. Tim Mahoney.
But also if the same guy's gonna say, how about, I'm gonna have a hamburger and french fries and give me a bottle of Jack to go down to the hotel. You know what I mean? It's a technicality thing, but it's.
Excuse me, just for clarification, I'm going to ask Attorney Cox, how much of this can we discuss at this time? Is this all right? Am I sticking to the program? He looked a little perplexed.
Typically, discussion on a motion is among the council, but I think that certainly council can direct questions to whomever they would like during.
So you directed a question to Attorney Mahoney.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Attorney
Alderman.
Mahoney, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Clem. So that question came up at our meeting because we had the same conversation. We had a lengthy conversation on this particular topic, mostly led by me asking the same questions that you are with the same with the same trepidation that you have. And after we clarified all that and decided, that actually a lot of the arguments that Shell was making made sense, another licensee asked that same question, is that really such a great idea? And the person that emphatically responded to it is the former chief of police on our liquor commission, who said, what's the difference between a guy going to Mort's and having a bourbon and driving literally 30 yards to Shell and filling his car with gas and going in and getting something to drink, or the guy stopping at Shell, filling his car with gas and getting a drink and then leaving? What's the difference? And the reality is there isn't much of a difference. And if that creates competition that goes against the parlors, which is exactly what Shell not only says, but what their research shows, then why not? And the other areas that have allowed this, which are several, haven't seen problems. That was also part of what we checked. They've been doing this in other locations, and it's not a significant challenge.
Did that answer your question?
Partially.
Okay.
You answered that one fully, but then the other thing that was mentioned tonight in a discussion, okay, was having the option of Shell pouring. Same argument you're going to use? Or
Yeah. Yeah. What's the difference? I mean, you're talking about, You're talking about a business that is literally, what, how far? 30 yards from, what's the difference? So you stop at Mort's and you have a beer, and then you go to Shell and fill your car with gas, or you go to Shell and fill your car with gas and have a beer. What's the difference? You can't take the beer in the car. That's illegal. You can't take open. That's illegal. So what's the difference?
Okay. And the last one, I'll just mention that I got a problem with that we can talk, and that's no big deal, is I still have a problem with the drive-through concept, and that's just me. Sorry.
Then don't open a business with a drive-through.
That's right. There you go. Whether it be for recreational pharmaceuticals or what, huh?
As we said, if we open it, as we said, we've had 2 drive-throughs operating in this town for 30 years, 40 years. We had 3 operating in this town for a significant period of time. I don't think the changes that we've seen in this community over the last 20 years that we're all trying to turn around have anything to do with the drive-through liquor stores.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thanks, John.
Alderman Keister.
Yeah, real quickly, first of all, I think I have to reflect Alderman Clem's feeling about pouring in a gas station. I've traveled extensively in a lot of different areas, and I have never seen a gas station that actually serves poured liquor. They may have a bar attached to them that does, but I've never seen a gas station that does, and I don't think I'd be in favor of having it here in town. In the same respect, having them serve packaged alcohol, I don't have a problem with that. You see that all over the place, and if it was going to be a big problem, I don't think it'd be as prolific as what it is. But to actually pour a drink in a gas station, have that, and then go out and get in your car after getting gas, I have a big problem with that. So, I mean, that's just my opinion, and it's something, like I said, I've traveled extensively in a lot of different areas. I've never seen it. I've never seen it where a gas station actually serves poured liquor. May have a bar next door or attached to it, but I've never seen a gas station that did.
Council, we have more discussion from anyone?
No.
Alderman Smith? No?
Well, I was just going to maybe take the opposite point of view on that, because it strikes me that the gas station, maybe it's a cultural barrier that we're all struggling with here, because any place you go to imbibe an alcohol, in many instances, you're operating a vehicle to get there. So, I mean, what's the difference if you're going into a gas station or you're driving to Mort's, in the example? I'm not sure there is one, but it's illegal to drive drunk, and so
Thank you.
That's the bar against that.
Thank you, Alderman Smith. We all have our own ideals on this, too. I had taken a few notes at the very beginning when Mr. Mahoney was speaking, and I was just going to surmise a little bit what he said, so we can kind of wrap our minds around it. You've all had excellent questions and input, and I know I'm just the chair of this, so it's harder for me to ask those questions, so I'm just going to do a little surmise this. He said with the old codes, there were a series of loopholes, and now with the Liquor Commission going through all this and with the public input, they've streamlined it so it works for everybody. They said at their first meeting they had a lot of participation from business owners. That was the public meeting. They had open dialogue with licensees, Liquor Commission, and everybody else that was involved. They had 4 2-hour-long meetings that a lot of people could give their input. I guess everyone that gave their input. This is what we have in our packets. They addressed all concerns that were presented by everyone that attended these meetings. And they also removed caps of the number of liquor licenses, and that was one of our big discussion items. And that's kind of how I look at all this. I know there are going to be a lot of little tweaks and a lot of maybe small changes we perhaps could make, but I am in approval of this myself, and I hope it moves forward tonight. Anyone else? Questions or concerns or dialogue? We already, I had asked if there was a motion, and Alderman Chesney had made a motion to move this forward, and it was seconded by Alderman Busker at the next scheduled council meeting, which would be February 20th. All those in favor of moving this forward?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? And the ayes have it. We are ready. Thank you very much, Liquor Commission, and we appreciate all your input with this, and also Attorney Cox. We'll move on to number 8, a discussion of approval of iWork, that's spelled small I WORQ. I had to ask how to pronounce it again. The approval of iWork agreement for an application for reporting potholes and nuisances and tracking work orders. We have the paper is in front of us, and also it's online, presented by IT Director Kurt Sutman, Director of Public Works Dennis Carr, Director of Community and Economic Development Nancy McDonald, and City Manager Lowell Crow. And who is going to begin this? Nancy McDonald, thank you. And
So when we started we looked at iWorks and we started putting a presentation together, one of the things we wanted to do was, excuse me, is not only give you an overview of the software itself, but show you how we would use it within our departments. So we learned a lot of things about it. iWorks is working with many local governments, including Delavan, Darien, and yes, those are in Illinois. I had to look it up. Yorkville and Monticello, Illinois, as well as Terry County, Illinois. It's a cloud-based system that will work on any website, computer, tablet, or mobile device using Chrome. iWorks is located in Logan, Utah, and the purpose of the system is to streamline local government department management while engaging citizens in the process. The iWorks system has quite a few different portals you can use. For our purposes, our initial contract with iWorks will include citizen engagement, public works management, community development management, and facility management. They offer other features that may be considered at a later time, including the licensing management, which offers an interesting way to keep track of licensing. It might help Dovey streamline what she does. Here's a few more items. One of the interesting portals they offer is FEMA reporting for natural disasters, which includes duration of work, equipment hours and costs, inventory use and cost, and location of work. And then there's also stormwater management portal, which allows for tracking maintenance history and asset tracking. This is probably one of the most exciting features of iWorks, at least for our department, and actually should be for the city as a whole. The citizen engagement tool. Citizens will actually be able to download the iWorks reporting application where they will make an account. From there, citizens can upload images of issues as well as enter data about the issues into the system for follow-up by our code enforcement division. Citizens will also be able to track the response to that issue. And what's really cool is it's in real time, so we would get a notification right away. There's also a component to this portal that allows for permit applications and staff requests, which I'll show you a little bit later. This isn't a really good view, but it is the portal that a citizen would see if they loaded this application on their mobile device and they saw, say, garbage on a street. They could take a picture of it, upload it into the system, make a few notes about it, where it's found, and then they can actually track it from there. Now, in terms of public works, and if I misspeak, Dennis, let me know. This portal will allow public works to track the time and cost of employees and equipment by job, resulting in a better understanding of addressing public works responses. It provides a method of keeping track of signs available and deployed, and the location of those signs or assets. Upon initial setup, we can customize the portals to meet our needs. This will allow for the city to garner specific data that can be used for future response planning and maybe even grant applications. In terms of facility management, this portal will allow for keeping track of work orders related to maintenance of city buildings. It will also manage maintenance schedules and include comprehensive reporting. In terms of community and economic development, iWorks system will allow code enforcement officials the ability to capture images of code violations themselves, print them in their vehicles, post violations on site, and generate warnings, letters, and notifications. Right now, our code enforcement officials actually go out, they'll take a picture, they upload it, they have to merge the letters with our current system, and it takes quite a bit of time to do that. We expect to increase efficiency through time save, not having to mail merge other types of letters and completing an inspection route. It will allow for improved response time to citizen complaints. It is fully integrated with the citizen engagement portal, which I showed a little earlier, with notifications received in real time. GIS mapping, do I hear a woo-ha from Kurt? GIS mapping data will be updated quarterly, but we could have it updated monthly for a fee. Again, setup of the system will be crucial to establishing the data we need. Reporting can be accomplished through canned or customized reports. This is a similar screenshot of the citizen engagement portal, but this one would actually be for permits. So we could do permitting online, and they actually have it's an add-on to the system. It's called iTransact, and what it allows for is people could get their permits online, and then they could also pay for it online. Some of the additional features we'd like to see, I mentioned, is the iTransact card purchasing, which allow for permit payments and other payments, such as licensing, if we choose to accept these portals in our own system. It is a secured and encrypted system. We can elect to have on-site backup scheduled on a scheduled basis that we could maintain as well. Having worked with many data systems, having unlimited user licenses and no additional tech charges is a great savings. iWorks is offering the city a contract at a lower rate too, even though the city is over the pricing threshold based on our current population. Questions?
Excuse me, Director McDonald, why are we over a pricing threshold based on our population? I'm not sure I understood.
It's 25,000 is the population threshold just for iWorks, and it's their own pricing model, so they're giving us a lower rate.
So what they've done is because we are going to, if we get approval and we're going to use this across integrated, they've offered us, and we're right at that threshold. They're going to bring us down to the next threshold, which I think is 15,000 to 25,000,
Right.
which reduces the cost to us.
Oh,
We
that's
did it.
wonderful. And I just wanted to add one more thing. Saw that you could apply for permits. I'm assuming that'd be building permits, is that correct?
Correct.
For, say, carpenters, builders, tradespeople. This is something that's been requested for many years from our public, so.
That's why we're so excited about it.
Yes, I am too.
Madam Chair.
Council?
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Thank
Alderman
you.
McClanahan.
Looking through the presentation and the supplemental documents that are in the packet, it seems like a great tool in a lot of different areas, whether you're talking permitting, whether you're talking enforcement, whether you're talking just citizens, and letting the city know on issues rather than having to call in and things like that. I think it streamlines the system. I think it'll provide a more response or a more effective response from us to the constituents. So I'd be in favor of the proposal.
Wonderful.
I don't want
Alderman-
a shortcut discussion, otherwise I'd make a motion, but.
Thank you. Alderman Keister.
Yeah, I just want to mirror some of the things that were said, and again, we've been beating the drum for permits online for a long time, and I'm glad to see it's come. And the fact that we've also been discussing for quite a while about making the city more user-friendly and more modern. I'm glad to see that we're going this route, and I would be very much in favor of it.
Council, any other input, questions?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Bob.
Alderman Smith.
So we live in the information age, of course, and this is a web-based application, and I assume the data sits on iWorks servers. If we choose in the future not to contract with iWorks, do we own our own data? Can we retrieve that?
I believe we own our own data. There'd have to be something worked out for the conversion of that data.
the storage, I can't, is so large out there that basically we couldn't pass up them storage. There'd be an issue. We own our own data, but then if we'd have to bring it down and store it, what is it, a terabyte of data or 10 terabytes of data that we can store, which is a lot of data out there.
Manager Crowe, I guess my question for you is, I do believe that there's a cost to this, and I also believe that it will replace some of our antiquated systems. What do you think the cost would be of the charge of what it will cost us minus what we would get rid of?
So the initial installation cost is $32,000, and then there's a annual fee. Currently, currently we're using the software within community development that we would save approximately $8,000 to $10,000, which is out of date, and we're going to need to replace it anyway. And we looked at multiple options to replace that software, and this was the best overall software to do it. We do not currently have a job tracking system. It's all done via paperwork, hand. So this, again, what's tough to measure is the measuring of the man hours that we're losing because we're having to have different people in the organization do it by hand, where we're all going to be doing it more automated. And that also puts it right at the fingertips of our directors, where right now they have to take time out of their day. So that, to answer the question, is we have about $12,000 in software, which this will replace, but there are other things this will make it more efficient and better operating system.
So, sir, you think we will save considerable amount of money in, obviously, in wages, and with taking this other offset, it'll save us money. May I ask how much is the annual fee? I know it's in here somewhere.
$19,000.
$19,000. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Alderman Keister and then Alderman Busker.
Manager Crowe, real quickly, will this be purchased, if we approve this, will this be purchased in this year's budget or next year's budget? And if so, there is money in this budget to do it if that's the direction we're going?
Our plan is to purchase it in this year's budget. This is an addition, with all of the IT equipment and software. We had originally not planned to purchase this. We're having to make some adjustments within the budget itself as to how we're going forward. The only thing that was planned in this year's budget is the financial software. We are in the process of finalizing that, so we will have to make some adjustments in other budgetary issues if we go forward with this.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Bucus, you have that line itemed already?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
The question is, where do you suppose this will come out of the budget? What line item?
It's coming out of the MIS department. We have $134,000 set aside for software upgrades.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry,
Madam
who
Chair.
asked? Yes.
Thank you. I'd make a motion to move this forward to the next council meeting with the recommendation for approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Alderman McClanathan to move this forward to the next council meeting, which would be Tuesday, February 20th, and it was seconded by Alderman Keister. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman Busker, I'm sorry, I did miss you.
Yes. Question I had was, what's the plan for announcing this to the public so that they know this is on board? Do they offer some sort of promotional advertising with it, or how do they get it out there?
What our plan to do is, once we get it uploaded and we're going to run it on our Facebook, on our webpage. We're also going to run a newspaper article in relation to it, and also radio spots. We're going to do multiple section advertisement, and we're also going to be going out and introducing it through the public, through meetings. I have several department heads that are speaking at various things. Well, I know we'll roll out to FALA, so we'll engage the public across the board.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we have before us to move this forward. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much, Director McDonald. We appreciate all your work on this.
Thanks.
And also you, Manager Crow. Moving on to item number 9, discussion of 2 options for water and sewer improvements, reconstruction in the area of the Freeport Club and Ridgefield Drive. This is presented by Director of Public Works Dennis Carr, Director of Utility Operations Thomas Kapansky, and City Manager Lowell Crow. And who will start this?
I'll just start it off real quick before I'll turn it over here to Dennis. So we are working throughout the city dealing with our stormwater. We've got several areas. One we've already worked on down in Alderman McClanahan's, and one we're working Alderman Clem's down Navajo Drive that we've identified solutions on it that we're doing within this city. Why we are bringing this particular one to you is this started in February of 2013, and the city has already received money for this, and there were some promises made to the residents. But the other thing is this is going to be quite a bit more expensive and not able to be done without assist from outside. So we want to make sure that you're aware of this. We are going to present 2 options that we ran through Fair Graham and through Dennis and Fair Graham, and I'll turn it over to Dennis.
All right, as you guys can kind of see from the pictures here, the stormwater runoff created from Parkview has reeled the citizens' property here pretty bad, and it's only going to get worse without any kind of maintenance. So before I was here, there was kind of an option 1A that we're not bringing up because neither me or Tom Kapansky or even Lowell himself we don't feel it's a viable option. And that was essentially we were going to realign the sanitary sewer in there, which is actually a force main that has 2 pump stations pumping through it, so it runs pretty full.
Is that option 1?
It accounts for approximately 30% of the city's sewage through this. So we'd have through this particular line. So that was where we started running into issues about relocating that line.
Yeah, and then to make those matters worse, the citizen was hoping to put in a storm pond, which would address the stormwater issue. But with that being over the top of the sanitary sewer, we were expecting some pretty high I&I rates, as well as the safety hazard of having a manhole in the middle of a pond. The only way they were going to be able to get to it was going to be a dock, and I would expect all of our guys to know how to swim, but if they didn't, I don't think we would want that insurance risk. So we pulled that one off the table right away. And then as you can see, option 1, this is the option 1. This was actually here before I was here as well. And I'm not sure if it was put together by the previous city engineer or if this was done from Fair Graham based on the property owner. This is a hard armor that they were proposing channel. This was back when Parkview was coming in. This was the improvement that they had proposed, and when it went out to bid, it came in a little over $90,000. So we were hoping to find a cheaper way to do it, and maybe one that didn't look quite so much like concrete blocks. So after talking with Tom Kapansky and Fair Graham, we came up with this idea of a couple of drop inlets or manholes starting at the property to the northeast. There is some erosion problems up there, so by presenting this solution, we not only take care of the property to the south, but then also that to the northeast. So instead of having a whole channel full of armor, we've only got a 25-foot by 33-foot riprap section there. And also in this one, there's a sanitary manhole that sits right off that driveway that's pretty hard to get to right now. And so in this solution, we would grade out a little berm that would allow our guys easier access to it.
The one thing that Dennis didn't point out, one of the things that he discovered as he was going through and walking this is the inlet coming off of the first inlet nearest Parkview is a 36-inch drainage, and it shrinks down to 24, which at the inlet into this. So when it was originally designed, which was 2 engineers ago, it went in exactly the opposite direction. You should go from smaller to larger, because what you're going to create is a water jet here. So this will address that issue. The other issue is we currently don't own the sewer easement in here. The sewer line, when it was installed initially, was not put along the city's easement, so we're going to have to address this with the landowner. Both of these landowners through this area, we're going to have to go back and renegotiate the easement as part of this. So just be aware that adds an additional cost into this. And that was when they originally lined this line in 2012, they were going to address that, and they never, the engineer and Water and Sewer Commission never addressed it at that time. So, and then this, the 2 manholes that are in the sewer are going to have to be lined, and that's part of our capital projects for next year, is to line these 2 manholes. The sewer line itself has been lined, but not the 2 manholes.
Are we able to ask questions yet?
Yes.
Mr. Carr, the cost of this second proposal, option 2, what would that be?
This option that's up right now, I believe Fairgram has it estimated at just over 42,000. Is that correct, or is it 45?
Or was it 62?
It was 62. I think it was 62.
This proposal here that I've got shown is 42,277.
Okay.
The armor would have been 62,000.
The armor was over 90.
Yeah.
So if, do we still have in our possession the $30,000 that was given to us for this project?
Not to my, that was received in 2015.
Well, please forgive me. I just thought, well, maybe it was sitting in an account somewhere that somebody had planned to finish this project. So I'm not trying to.
No, and I'm not trying to be flippant with you either. I'm sorry. We whether the money, I'm not sure if the money still exists in any account at this point where this was addressed, and we received the money in here, and we haven't done the forensic accounting on it to see actually where that money was received through the Water and Sewer Commission from Parkview for the construction.
And sir, are you looking at taking the money out of like capital improvement funds?
It would be out of the Water and Sewer capital improvement.
And one more question. I guess this is for you, Mr. Carr. The 25 or 33 foot something that is drawn on there, what is that? Is that a grate? Is it a drainage hole? What is that?
That is our R5 riprap.
A what?
Riprap, big rocks.
Can you explain it a little bit more so I can understand? Just rocks?
Those rocks are probably going to be a foot in diameter, and they're going to be stacked in a pattern at the outfall there. So when the water comes out of the flared end section, it hits the rocks and slows down even more.
So that's a flared section that we see, and it's going to hit a bunch of the huge rocks.
Yep.
To dilute the water so it doesn't wash everything away.
Yep.
And then how long is that channel of rocks? Where am I looking at the rocks?
That is 33 feet. Do we have a laser pointer?
I'm just trying to, I've looked at this. I have it
It's the
actually
hash.
printed it up, and I was going to ask those questions because I don't understand how to read these engineering drawings.
Okay, so it's the farthest southwest. There's a little hatch that looks like a trapezoid. Does that help you?
No.
Yeah, there's a dark gray area in the middle of this.
I'll put my glasses back on. Maybe I can see the trapezoid, but from here I just see it looks like a little Roman drawing to me. So.
Randy's grabbing a pointer.
Okay.
See it?
Yeah, sort of.
Oh,
Then we have a long stick where we can just.
I think Randy's coming with the laser pointer, maybe.
And please forgive me, I'm not trying to be ignorant here, but I want to be able to explain it if constituents ask me these questions. And also Alderman Clem, this is in his ward, and he's going to have the same, I don't want to say nosy people, but people that care about this project and want to know exactly what was been done. And I know I'll be put on the spot in my next neighborhood watch meeting, so it's important for me to understand.
Okay. Currently, there's a see if I can aim it properly without the shakes here. So there's currently a existing storm sewer here that crosses underneath that road, and then there's one that crosses underneath this driveway.
And the
So,
road, can you name the roads and the driveways, please? Ridgefield, okay, Drive.
Yep.
And then it crosses down towards the golf
Yep.
course?
So we're gonna put in a new 5-foot manhole here that's got, I think this drawing has about a 9-foot drop in it.
Okay.
So it's gonna take the velocity of the water out in that energy right there. Then it's gonna come down a 42-inch concrete storm sewer, which is gonna be buried underground instead of it flowing over the top of the ground.
So that one will be underneath the ground?
Yep.
Okay,
And then where this existing storm sewer pipe right is right now, we're gonna put another drop inlet here to get it down to this bottom elevation. So then that pipe coming out is gonna be flat.
and a drop inlet is also underground?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep, so the only thing they're gonna see is they're gonna see an open beehive grate here and an open beehive grate here. So once it gets here, there's gonna be a concrete flared in section, which is gonna outlet onto the pile of rocks.
the rocks?
But the rocks are gonna be flat on the ground.
Okay,
Alderman Brascia?
elsewhere. Yes, Alderman Clem.
Yeah, I think the thing, if you take a look at this overall, there's a couple things into it. This is a nice way out of doing it. It'll look good when it gets done. The water will be flared out and run much slower downstream from that.
Yes.
I think, you know, if we were to say, okay, we got 4 top priorities of water runoffs, would this theoretically be one? The answer, that's probably not, but guess what? It's gone on for since 2013 and never been resolved, and we've been paid to do part of the work. That's the part that's bad. So I think if, you know, and this is something, I'm gonna assume that we can handle most of it in-house?
Our guys can't handle 42-inch pipe, it's too
Okay.
big for our machines.
Okay. But we're looking at it that we, in your figure, it looks reasonable to do that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I think our guys can do some of those items. We can do the tree removal and some of the driveway work.
And the riprap, to give you an idea, where you might see some is if you go by Park Hills, if you look along the sides of some of the places of the creeks that come down to there, you'll see big rock that go into it. And basically what that does is just slow down the water and back it up and spread it out. Is that correct on it?
Yeah, it reduces the velocity of the water.
So I think for what, you know, I think for what we're doing, it appears to be a reasonable fix, and, you know, I'd vote to move it forward simply because it's gone on for X number of years, and, you know, it should be done properly for the customer.
Chair.
And one second, please. And I completely concur with what Alderman Clem said. I do remember this as an embarrassing issue because I remember asking those questions about the drainage to make sure that this would be done properly so that we wouldn't have these problems. And I had actually pointed out that we had water back up one of my neighborhoods along America, and then later they had to fix it, and then they had to fix it again. And Alderman Clem asked these very specific questions about the drainage when this went in. So as one of the third most senior alder people, I actually saw this before when this went in, and I'm embarrassed that it wasn't done properly. So we do have those questions, and I'm sad that the money isn't there, but hopefully we can get it out of the capital improvement fund and make it all work. I'm also in support of this.
Chair.
First Alderman Keister and then Alderman Chesney.
Yes, thank you. Just a real quick question. All that water's coming down through that channel. It's gonna come out the wider end with the rock there. That's gonna keep down the velocity enough that you're not gonna have a lot of erosion problems and stuff down below that?
Yes, it's cutting it over half before it outlets onto the rock, so the rock's gonna take care of the last little bit.
Okay. Yeah, it does.
Alderman Chesney.
Yes, I just wanted a quick question about the accounting piece. Could you give us some analysis on where we're at for the $30,000? I mean, when we say we don't know, that's alarming. So, could we have at least some idea where it went and where it moved and what happened?
This is the first I've heard about the $30,000, so that's something we have to look into.
Yeah, I'm not saying we have to do a forensic audit, but you know, saying, well, we don't really know where it went. We probably could, you know, maybe look into that.
And we haven't
we've been more focusing on getting the engineering side versus getting where I know that previous engineer to Dennis received the money
Okay.
in 15. We just got to figure out where it went from there.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to give Betty a hard time either. I believe it was $30,000 that had been paid to address this problem some time ago, and I don't know if that's in this paperwork or not, but I do remember that figure.
It's in the timeline.
It is.
In October of 2015.
Madam Chair,
22.
Yes, Alderman McClanathan.
I would second Alderman Clem's motion to move this forward to the next council meeting.
I'm not
Made
sure,
it- he
do
made
we
it at the
need
end of his
action on this, Manager Crowe?
No, this was more of an informant to you to let you know, and then get the questions that the council may have that we can come back and answer you. And I have Alderman Chesney's request to go down into water and sewer and figure out where this money actually went. So I'll feed that back in the council updates to you.
And then that will come back before the council eventually?
This will be part of the capital projects. You'll see when we brief out the capital projects as part of the budget.
Thank you, sir. I didn't believe we had action required on that tonight, so we're going to move on. Thank you very much, Mr. Kerr, and everybody that was involved in this. Thank you.
Option 2.
Moving on to item number 10, we have discussion of ordinance 2018 blank at this time. It doesn't have a number. It says an ordinance amending individual provisions of chapters 1040, 1042, 1044, 1048, 1052, and 1060 of the codified ordinances of the City of Freeport pertaining to municipal utility services. Billing and collection procedures presented by Director of Public Works Dennis Carr, Director of Utility Operations Thomas Kopansky, and City Manager Lowell Crowe. And who will begin this?
I will.
Manager Crowe, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So this started back as we've gone through the procedures. This was actually Attorney Cox and I started looking at the requirements because we were having problems in leaning out long-term expenses and how we were doing shutoffs when we were going for the sale, clearing liens when the sales of real estate happened. So we actually met with Billy Shore and got some feedback from the title companies on how we could address this. And one of the things that came out was looking at our procedures, we were basically going 90 days before shutoff occurred from the time, and that had gotten people, and we had the regular group of people that knew that they had 90 days to pay it off. And what we did was Steve and I sat down and looked at what are the actual state requirements. And the state requirements are that we go and so we have 30 days. We notify them that they're late after that 30 days, 10 days to pay it, and then we have to do a hanger notification that they're late and that water will be shut off 5 days later. And that pretty well meets the state requirements as we go forward. So that the other issue was and you heard a discussion, one of the citizens addressed, we are continually running for 5 years for people that voluntarily shut off their water and sewer, basically shut off their billing, the infrastructure fee. And what we're finding is that when we go to get that infrastructure fee paid back to us, we're having to negotiate it down to where really all we're getting back is at most a year. So the question is we're building this liability up on our records. These are voluntary shutoffs. Why not actually address and show in the ordinance what we can actually collect and lien for infrastructure fees, as well as put in an ordinance to address the actual what's going on with the water, so we can shut water off so we're not having a 90 days worth of water bills build up against a particular account and letting people continue to use the water even though they're not paying for it. I've had both Director Kapansky and Public Works Director Carr look at this. Steve and they shared them with their individuals within their staff as well, got some feedback from them. And Steve and I believe that this is addressing, there are a few issues which we may make changes. Director Hughes gave us some additional inputs from a financial director position as how we, on collections, some ideas that he has. And we may make those changes as we go forward, but we wanted to put it out here for discussion. And with that, Steve, is there anything else you want to add to this?
I think that pretty well covers it, but certainly happy to answer questions if anybody has.
Tom, did you want to add anything to this?
No, I don't have anything at this time.
Dennis?
Council members, any questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman McClenathan.
Thank you. First, at the offset, I appreciate the endeavor here to tighten things up on this end, to not allow our liabilities to get out of control, and I think this will be helpful. That said, I have a few particular questions on initially 1040.03, actually, 1040.02B, on the 15 days on the billing. This is kind of a comment. About 2.5, 3 years ago, we were talking about how much time, and Director Glendenning at that time was talking about how much time there is to pay bills. And I haven't stuck in my mind yet, sometime around 30 days before, but the 15 days in how we're currently running it does get it pretty close. And I know that because my wife tells me every month, she says, hey, we're not getting the amount of days on that. And she says, why is that the case? So if we're doing 15 and we're going to be tacking on a 10% fee on it, I think we need to make sure that we're really tight on our portion on the mailing, so that coincides. So it's, I realize you have limited control on the post office and things of that nature, but I haven't just heard it at home. I've heard it from others as well. The second point, I really like the 1 year provision that you talked about in 1052.03. I think that's going to be very beneficial. I did have a question for Attorney Cox on 1060.18. Why are we striking the language on there that begins, the city may take all steps permitted by state law, and goes forward from there? I realize you kind of put more technical provision, I think, right after that, but about assessing a lien, but what's the thought process behind taking that out? It's in...
second paragraph.
Right. That the,
Or third, yeah, second paragraph.
second paragraph on page 11 of 12.
It's the very last paragraph you have, Steve.
Mind.
It's the city shall have the right to access whatever penalties, interest, and are due and owing to such solid waste collection services, and you struck the last.
Great question. Where that comes back in, Alderman, is in 1040.02G. It's the combined billing. So the idea is to take all of those, the billing that's currently broken up between water, between sewer, between the capital improvement fund, and pull all of the billing and all of that language into 1040, which is the combined billing services. So if you look at 1040.02G, that does contain that broad language that we can fall back to, the any and all remedies.
Great. Thank you.
So that's where that got pulled into.
Thank you.
Chair.
Alderman Keister.
The one question I do have, and Manager Crowe kind of mentioned it, is the fees that continue to accumulate when somebody voluntarily shuts off their water system. I understand why it's that way, but in the same respect, I've had, since I've been on the council, a number of phone calls from people who are buying properties who have been vacant for a while that had a pretty substantial fee to pay to buy the house before they even moved in. Is there some way we can address that somehow, so in certain conditions we can waive that or assist if it's to sell a house and get people in here or something, some way we can work on that to help them out?
Well, what we're currently are doing is the title company's running the back looking at the back-owed fees. Then they are forwarding that to us, and we're actually reaching a negotiated settlement typically with these. And what we're finding is we're collecting about 25%. And that was the reason why we went from 5 years, which it currently is, down to a single year. And it's being collected not from the seller, not from the buyer, it's being collected from the seller.
Okay.
So we never force the buyer, at least since I've been here, we've never forced the buyer to pay the fee. It is strictly the seller, and we are capturing basically before the seller gets any money back from the sale of the property, they have to pay all the outstanding liens and cost, unless Steve knows of it. That's what you and I basically worked with, right?
That is.
Follow up.
Yeah, yes, Alderman Keister.
And I appreciate that. And I do know that since I've been on the council, there have been several incidents where people who have purchased a house have called me and said that they had to pay that fee to get their water turned back on. And I'm glad to see that we're trying to address that from another avenue, because if we continued along that path, it could definitely hurt housing sales in this community and stuff. And that's one thing we don't want to do.
I would like just to add a little bit to that. If it's a for sale by owner, or somebody's purchasing it on contract, that's part of the liability that they may or may not take on. But if there's an actual sale of a house that goes through a licensed realty, whether it's a HUD home, a for sale by owner, or if it's a real estate owned property by a bank, they do a title search on it, and the title search will show what is an outstanding debt and protect the buyer and the seller, as Mr. Crow says, does pay those fees. So I'm not really sure who you were talking to, but maybe they were buying on contract, or maybe they were doing something a little different than what a normal sale, a purchase would be. I know Director McDonald deals with some of the issues of these, what do you call, the liens from the city on properties, and you have to deal with some of the title companies, I'm supposing. Is that correct? And is it as I stated and what Manager Crow said for the most part for sales?
It is.
Thank you. Did you know anything else on that?
All I know for sure is that I've had several people since I've been on call me. They were purchasing a house and they had difficulty moving in because of the back fees that were there. Now, exactly how they purchased them, whether on contract or through a realtor at that time, I don't know. I know it's probably been 2 years now anyway since I've heard this. But I know there's been at least two occasions that I remember in the past 7 years where I've received calls on that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Attorney Cox, page 4, top of page 4, first paragraph, it's subparagraph B. And it's under the broader portion, application for combined municipal services, and it's talking about a change in a tenancy or the change in the owner. Could you run through what that's saying here, and how is that going to be applied?
Sure. But most of the problems that we run into typically are not owner-occupied properties. Typically, they're circumstances with tenants in rented properties. So what this says is that a tenant can't be eligible for water services unless the owner of the property actually joins in that application. Doesn't necessarily mean that the owner is liable. They are in many communities. Many communities require the landlords or the owners to actually get the water bills. That's not what we're doing here. But what we are doing is requiring the landlord to participate in the sign-up process. And the reason for that is if there's any past sums due from a prior tenant, it lets them know that right away, so that if they're subject to a lien, they can collect that immediately. And that's really the sum total there.
It is not putting the onus on the landlord. All it's letting the landlord know is that his previous tenant had an outstanding water bill. That water bill follows with that tenant.
Follow up, Madam?
Yes.
And then the final sentence there, when any such change is made without giving the city notice. So if somebody doesn't give the city notice, within 48 hours after the change, the new tenant or owner shall be held responsible for payment of all water service from the most recent meter reading.
Correct, and that mirrors the current language, actually. So what that says is if we find out, and we've run into situations where somebody has managed to turn their own water on in some circumstances, and so if there's a transfer and somebody starts service, or somebody there's a new tenant that didn't take on the new account, then once we find out, then that's, you know, within 48 hours after that, their bill starts whether they signed up for it or not.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Alderman.
Motion to move this forward to the next regular scheduled meeting.
I have a motion by Alderman Keister to move this forward to the next scheduled meeting, which will be February 20th, which is Tuesday. Do we have a second? Seconded by Alderman Ross. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next, move on to public comments. Do we have anyone in our public audience who would like to speak to the council? There are no public comments at this time, so do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Multiple motions by, we'll say Alderman Keister, and seconded by Alderman Busker. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Aye. Ayes have it.
If not, I'm going to.